then we have a summary of adaptations and replacing that. And then the third one was actually the first one, which was those two major recommendations and the list of minor recommendations that you had presented very early on.
I mean, if Sarah's found some issue with it, that's fine. We can go back, we can send it out again. But that's my understanding is that what you wanted was USD SOPs and a summary of adaptation. And what I gave you was USD SOPs and a summary adaptation. So I thought I was giving what the last task force requested.
Yeah, and I think that is what we requested at the last meeting. So I think that that's all on the right track. I think, from my perspective, what needs to happen is that the document, just so that the work group can see it and verify that everything's captured, I think that it needs to go to the work group, and it could be over email, and then they can approve it. And then this group also didn't receive that document until Friday, and that's just these, our timeline's very short. The meeting was on Wednesday last week.
I sent it out on Thursday, and then it took a while to get reviewed and sent back out. So.
Yeah, so the timeline is pretty crunched. So in order for this group to review it, because I don't know how comfortable folks feel about, putting a motion forward to approve something that they haven't seen before today. Personally, I don't feel very comfortable with
that. It has a lot of changes.
Yeah, it has a lot.
Adaptations would be many, many motions. It's a lot of technical changes to the document. Basically, what we did is everything that was unanimous, we just put on the summary adaptation document, and those kept getting longer and longer, and anything that was controversial, we put out as a separate motion.
And that's how we had structured
anything
this.
That didn't fit on the four main SOPs that we used, so the admin SOPs, we put out a separate motion because we didn't want to adapt admin, we wanted just to carve out pieces of it and adapt it in parts, because the bulk of admin has to do with federal rules and state rules, and it's appropriate for this.
Okay. So, the labs that are here. Hi, are you for Department of Health?
No, I'm Cannabis Analytics.
Oh, okay.
She's a task force
and
member.
the analytical working group.
Oh.
She's done a lot of work for us.
So we a concern came up. Just thanks for that. And a concern came up within the last couple of weeks that some analytical work group members who weren't part of the steering committee were involving themselves in the discussion, and others felt like they were prevented from involving themselves in the discussion. So we should decide how we want to structure the discussions amongst the steering committee.
And I think if we go back to our charter, I think it provides a little bit of direction on that we had all kind of agreed to as far as how the meetings would be structured. And
can you remind us?
Sure, yeah. And basically it's during the steering committee meetings, only steering committee members, it's open to the public, steering committee members participate in discussions, and everyone else participates in the public meeting portion.
Or bring their thoughts through the work group chair.
And bring them through, yeah, everything's supposed to come through the lead, the work group lead. Yep.
Okay, just to kind of keep things rolling. Yeah. So, okay, well, as long as we all remember what we agreed to, that's good.
Well, I was going to say for today, if some of this is kind of framing up the documents we have before us and making some choices on what we're going to choose as a steering committee to tackle today versus another time, I think the summary of adaptations, right, which in our email is called the model document summary, right, those are the same thing.
What it does is, how the summary goes through is it says, here's the model document, and then it lists the name of the model document, and then it says general changes to that model document, and then specific changes to the model document, and then it goes to the next model document, and goes and so forth. So what it's trying to say, I could have used more words, but there was sort of a tension between the desire to only have the changes to make it really brief and not have extra verbiage, and like Sarah was saying, have that extra verbiage occur in another document. and to make enough words to make it make sense. So, so there was, I may have,
No, I don't have any complaints about.
That was sort of why it is.
No, I have no
Some of the
complaints about the
choices are-
document. We're just making sure for all of us that we're connecting that document is titled is this document that we've been talking about, summary of adaptation. So we just know we do have it and the structure that it has. And we do have another document here that has some motions. It looks like that are in front of us today that I don't mind tackling those and making sure the summary of adaptation documents gets back out to the analytical work group electronically, give them a chance to see it in its entirety before we kind of take a run at it. But we can address, I think, the motions that were not unanimous, right, that are basically these standalones that the analytical work group has pushed to us. Because I do see a couple here in our emails, one of which, if we get to that point, I think we've talked about before, but it looks like we've got at least a handful that look like have been sent our way, bumped up our way for some thought. Is that kind of where we were headed, thinking about today? Let's go ahead and move that adaptation document to the analytical work group. Make sure that they write it concise, it has all those elements, and then we tackle the individual motions.
Yeah, we need to try to get as much progress today as we can, because I know Sarah was supposed to start writing on December 1st.
I have.
Oh, okay, well, that's shocking. That's great. But just to make sure that she has enough content, to keep doing that, because the legislative reports have so much review built into them. The timeline is not, we don't have until June, we have until May, or March. January? February, maybe?
We'll tackle that a little bit
Okay,
later.
okay. So Sarah, so I like that recommendation, Kendra, that that there may be enough if we've had enough discussion. So the folks here from the labs, on the steering committee, did you get a chance to look through these things, and do you have any questions you want to discuss here on where we're at and what it is we're going to be deciding on? You feel like you have enough clarity there?
Yeah, I have not had the chance to go over the document stuff, so I would, like Jessica was saying, I'd be a little bit uncomfortable making any kind of votes on that. In particular, if the analytical work group hasn't had the chance as well to examine them. It seems like we could have somewhat of a discussion about it, but from my perspective, it'd be good to have the analytical work group take a look again, make sure that it's the document that we want to present to us, and then maybe we could have an email vote or something like that to speed along the timeline.
Okay. So just to be clear, and tell me if I get this wrong, Mike, but the documents all exist already in email format. They're just not combined into one package. Am I right? So they're sort of spread through a number of emails, but they're already there.
The attempt was to make this the combined document. The idea was the model changes is the combined document.
Okay.
Of the unanimous modifications to USDA.
And
That was the intent.
And the analytical work group has that, and they've had that for
We've had these discussions
a while.
At our meeting, we'll agree to change something, and so I'll put it on the list, and we'll agree to change something else and go down. And in terms of, like, did I write out this exact format and send it out to the group? No, we didn't do it in that way. It was done piecemeal, and then summarized as a summary of changes. So the work group did it in pieces. It would say, okay, here's what we agree about this SLP and this section of it, and I'd write that down. There was no summary and then review of the summary. It was all done just as part.
Okay, so I'm a little bit sensitive about asking you to do it yet again. So I'm trying to.
We can send it out as an email, and I don't think this is going to require a meeting since we've already discussed all of this. So if you think, and I do think it's important that this be reviewed by the task force. These while they are unanimous to the work group, they are substantive and quite voluminous. There's quite a few different recommendations here. So if there was an actual agreement between task force members and work group members, or or there was some institutional knowledge of the task force that should be directed at the work group to say, oh yeah, I know something about this that you guys might not have looked into, maybe you should go back and look at it, then that would make sense to go, reconsider a recommendation if there's some concern. But from the work group perspective, we talked about these all quite a bit. We had a lot of meetings, very productive meetings, very long meetings. We've met twice a month for several months now, so we've had a lot of hours on these documents, and there's only so much you can do with the 4 documents that we've meticulously gone over.
So I have, according to the documents that I'm trying to keep track of for these meetings, I have 3 marked up documents that you then tried to summarize in this summary today. And then I have a 4th one that's labeled admin that is not marked up.
So what we did with the admin document is we took out several portions of it that we thought were comparable, and they're in the motion today.
Okay.
The bulk of the admin document had to do with administrative federal rules and administrative and state rules. So it had a lot of, here's a section on how you do equipment management in federal contracts, and here's a section how you do accounting management in federal contracts, which is just not appropriate to this task force or meeting. So it was so much of it was inappropriate that instead of saying to modify it is to cut everything except these 3 sections, we just put forward those 3 sections as separate motions.
Gotcha. Great. Thank you.
Okay. So the material has been out there, the analytical work group has done its work. Maybe is the next step to just have the task force spend some time now with the product and make sure that the task, so it's not the analytical work group that has to look at it again, it's the task force members?
I mean, I was hoping to do that anyway. I was gonna do that anyways, so.
Okay.
Well, that would be helpful. If that was the case, if a task force member would review the work of the work group and say, in my experience, I found this, it would be better to do this or that, or this technical thing, that would be something that could go back to the work group, and we could try and see whether we could get consensus on that. And if there's something that I missed because I was trying to take notes and discuss, then, we could send it back to the work group, and if we weren't in agreement, we could come back to it. But my intention is these were unanimous agreements that we had made at some point, and we put them forward. And it was then up to the task force to do what it wanted to do with them.
Yep, and I think that's still the plan, and that we would take that document and vote on it, and if there were differing opinions, we'd make sure that we captured those, and those different opinions would end up in the report with however the final motion was turned out. So where are we then on this? Do folks feel like we would be ready on some of these motions at the end of the day, to work on those?
I think I think it'd be good if maybe Mike could talk about the commodity groups and where that landed, because we have a motion on that, and we have talked about that quite a bit in this group. So I think that is probably one that we could vote on today. Also, Mike could talk a little bit about the laboratory roles within the admin group, and I think that's probably one we could vote on today. QA officer roles, we talked about that in here, the independent, whether it should be independent or not, and that's another one. And then there is a motion in the documents you guys received on Friday to have the work group see the summary of adaptations document and then get that back to us so that we can review it once they've looked at it. So I guess that's the other one. I don't know if we need a motion for that.
Do you feel like they need to look at it again?
They haven't seen it. They've gone over the track change documents, but they have not seen the summary of adaptations document that we have here.
So that would add an additional step then.
I mean, it sounds like we would anticipate that they've been a part of this process, it's been unanimous, like, there shouldn't be any issues with it, right? We wouldn't expect the members to have any changes
Do
at
we
this
want the
point.
task force to look at the document and send anything back to the work group? Should that be reviewed as well?
Absolutely, yeah, I mean, that's our job,
If
right?
the task force looks at it, and then we can give you, hopefully, a summary of both changes, and we will have comments on it. Because I think it's ready, at least most of those are ready for some sort of review by the task force. So if the task force members would like to look over it and send comments back down to the work group, that would also be constructive.
I'm a little bit reluctant to add too many more layers into the work you've already done.
Well, this is sort of the problem, is we're in a circle, because
Right.
it's like, the task force needs to approve a final document, but before they do it, it has to be reviewed by the work group. That every time it sees a document, it decides, well, we can tinker with this and make it better. And then we end up with, and then if the form of the document keeps changing, we want it in revised SOPs, we want it in motions, we want it in summaries of revised motions, then that makes a new document that has to be reviewed, but it's the same substance reformat, but maybe not, because, every time you copy something, you have the speakers around the room problem that, I thought I heard this, but I really meant that, and so, I want to help you guys out how I can, but we do need to, I think we could probably do it by email at this point. I don't think there's anything, except
It feels like the work group could do this
the
by
work group
email.
would need more meetings, unless you're going to make the work group do something else, because that's another question of the work group. Now that we've finished this task, does the work group expand, or do we go on to a different?
Yeah, we'll talk
task?
about that. Okay. So it feels like the work group, has the material, and, maybe for the sake of being efficient, that the task force, now gets the summary, and I'm not saying we don't already have it, but for me, to try to get it all into one summary, and then the task force members can reach out to work group members if they have questions. But, if we're going to vote on something, we should know what we're voting on, and then, I don't know that we can do it through email, because if there's gonna be any discussion, I think we want to have it when we're all here. The email discussion doesn't usually work that well.
Possible to set up a conference call for just this one.
We could set up a conference call,
A
yep,
little easier,
that might be a lot easier.
especially if we're only talking about one topic and one motion.
And well, it's a motion, it's a big motion.
Yeah, it is
But,
big.
how much time do you think you would need to go through the document and have your,
Probably something like that.
1 week?
A week, yeah. At the minimum.
Okay. Amber?
Yeah, that's enough time.
Okay. I mean, 1 week is Christmas.
Right, I
Christmas
mean-
week,
That is
so,
true.
yeah, and then New Year's week, so we sorta, so I think, when is our next
You're
task
trying
force
to get it done
meeting?
before then?
When is our next task force meeting?
January 10th, 20th, or is that Mary?
Okay, so we would do it before then, but it would probably be in January.
Yeah.
Okay, all right. We'll find a time, and, we'll, hope that'll have people have enough time to frame their thoughts, to reach out to the resources that you have, and weighing the work of the work group, because, the work group is there for a reason, to get us to a good place, as good a place as we can, so. Okay, so that seems like a good way to move forward. Is that clear? What's the subject again, clearly? The conference call will be the motion, what did you call Kendra, the, model of adaptive,
that we will be reviewing and, looking to have motions, for approval
adopt.
on the model of summary adaptation. Model document of summary adaptation.
And we'll send it out to the work group with any changes we get. We can either, make the change if it's like, okay, we do that or a typo or something, we put that forward. And, if there's anything from the task force to send down the work group, that's fine too. We can see whether that would require a meeting.
Okay. So I would say we all have the model of summary adaptations already, so we shouldn't wait. We should look at that, and if there's any big things missing that you see,
Small.
well, I mean, yeah, well, if it's a small thing, could be a big thing, right? But I mean, not talking about editorial changes, but just big conceptual changes that can go back. But other than that, I mean, I think if we need some questions answered, we need a little bit more information from the work group to understand how they landed on something. I think that's fair to get that. Reach out to your members on the work group, and then we'll schedule something for probably the first or second week in January, and try to get maybe the week after January 1st. Try to schedule a conference call and see if we can have a vote on those.
So we're going to all review it at the same time, the task force and the work group, is that, or is the work group going to review, send us a final, and then we review?
Well, what I'm hearing from Mike is that we already have the summary.
We have the summary, but they just haven't seen it.
So,
So that's what I'm,
so I'm
and
trying,
there's some comments in it.
Yes. and I'm trying to just make us more efficient. So, Mike is saying, as the lead of the work group, that they've all agreed on these. So, I think Mike will send it out and to the work group as well as to the task force, but I don't think the task force should wait, or the steering committee should wait for the analytical work group to come back again and say, this is complete. I think we just reach out to our work group members, or any of the members on the work group, if we think that there's something missing.
So we're all gonna review at the same time?
I think so. Yeah. That's my trying to be efficient.
Well, hopefully with, the work group having been a part of that summary document, hopefully they won't have any changes, right?
Yeah, and if they do, then they can bring it up to, a steering committee member, and then, because we'll need to vote on the package, and we want to get it right. Okay, so then those other motions, I think, that you identified, we can maybe get to, but Jessica, you had a question about the commodities.
Oh, no, I was suggesting that, Mike give us an overview about the commodities.
Motion one?
Yeah, where they landed, and then, because I think that's something that we could vote on today. We've all heard about it in the past, about where their discussion was.
So we had some discussion about this at the last task force meeting, and we brought it back to the work group to try and address some of the concerns that came up. USDA defines commodity groups, and then commodities, which, maybe if you like to think of them like commodity types, or, things that within the group. In terms of the SOPs, what happens is you have certain required method validation steps for a commodity group. And then you have, once you validated that group of commodities, and if you want to add a commodity that's part of that group to that group, there's another lesser step, fewer steps to do to add the commodity to that group. So we thought that this, in terms of method validation, would make sense to do for cannabis, is you could take cannabis flower as a commodity group and then have different types of cannabis and call them commodities. The work group identified 3 different types. High THC cannabis flower, high CBD cannabis flower, and high both, high THC and high CBD cannabis flower. It defined what high is to be 10%, and then it wanted to make sure that you could artificially make a matrix of the high by mixing together two other matrices. So that we put in language about allowing mixtures. So basically, this sort of sets in place in the USD SOPs. It says for commodity groups, you have to do certain method validation steps and quality control procedures. For commodities, you have to do certain method validation steps and quality control procedures. If you've already validated a commodity group and you're just adding another commodity to it, there's a lesser set of steps to add that commodity to it. If you're doing analytical work, there's certain QC you're supposed to do with each commodity. And so by defining commodity groups and commodity types, you, by reference, define quality control procedures, method validation procedures for those commodities.
And you're bringing this forward because there was some discussion amongst the work group members. It was not a unanimous. We agreed to this. There was some discussion. There was quite a bit of discussion both at the last meeting and at this meeting about it. The last task force meeting, it wasn't very clear. I think some of the task force members found it ambiguous, and there was some confusion about why are we calling different types of commodities. It does entail, if you were just to call cannabis a commodity and the group, we think then without the separate types, that would result in sort of less QC, some less method validation. Some labs thought. So a heavier burden to the labs.
There was they agreed to this, but it wasn't like some of them weren't like ecstatic about it. But yeah, we could do this.
But it's needed because the lab standards for the 3 commodity groups are different and need to stay different.
Well, there was thought they were analytical different enough that a reasonable laboratory would do method validation steps based on the 3 different commodities sort of to determine what the method was. So if you use those models, you would end up doing method validations on the 3 different types. And then if you validate them that way, the USDA SOPs flow for the other requirements. So if you're going to use the USDA model, then it makes more sense to, where it says apples, you put in cannabis. Where it says oranges, you put in, sort of.
Okay.
That's how you make, and this would have been set in the federal model by EPA. Obviously, EPA is never going to say anything like this. It is a little more stringent, probably, than the federal would do, which was like just call cannabis flower one commodity and be done with it. But it's a very high variability commodity, has a lot of matrix issues, and several labs say, I just wouldn't do that. I would obviously run several different types of matrices to do methodology.
Okay. Anybody else?
It has a cost.
For the 3 commodity groups, knowing that we've talked before about what that might look like, I know the notation here on the document says that the 10% are, right, equal then or greater to 10% is high for either THC or CBD. Was there someone from Department of Health who was at this conversation?
Yes, okay. There was a Department of Health representative. They've been attending on the phone. I think they had 3 people at one point, but 2 people were definitely there.
And I don't know, is Shelley on the phone today?
Shelley was is sick today
Okay,
and
so I
she's not
just
able
wanted
to
to check in.
participate.
Because I wanted to chat about 10% or higher, knowing that, it was based on the lab expertise. My want to double check was there's not any place that high has already been defined in rule that we need to at least acknowledge. And I'm not seeing it in rule, but I am finding it in Department of Health. They don't have it listed as THC percentage, but they have definitions that say high THC products are marijuana products containing more than 10 milligrams, but not more than 50 milligrams of active THC per serving or application. So the rest of this goes forward, talking about really, again, like the weight of rather than the percentage content of THC. So it was just a thought I had that we want to make sure that don't inherently, unless we know that we've got a place that a rule needs to be talked about,
Create a conflict.
have a conflict right out of the gate with saying 10% on THC or CBD.
So is that milligram serving limit, that's for edibles though, right? Or
This
is that-
one, yeah, it says per serving or application, right? This one is not specific to edibles as far as I can find.
Would that language, I guess, apply to cannabis flower is kind of where I'm going with
Yeah,
that.
I think that's fair, and that's what I've been trying to do as part of while we're having this conversation, is see where I can find some of these original source language, and that's why I wondered if maybe, and it sounds like Department of Health was participating, but if they had raised that, rather than me putting it on the table. So I just have a question there. I don't have any source documentation I have found yet that'll steer me in one way or the other. The other just check-in is just the choice of high, right? And if we talk about what are the definitions of hemp versus marijuana, right, those are down at 0.3% THC. And just to wonder if their work group talked about the value of just talking about testing marijuana versus high or low marijuana, right? And designating a high category versus, hey, here's hemp, right? And our flower that we're testing is 0.3% THC or above, rather than the 10%. So that's just another check-in.
This is all analytically driven, like, to get the product binned in the right analytical procedure and process to give you results, but then that would be evaluated a part of that other, this is, like, selfishly, this is just for the lab people to figure out what these little, like.
So absolutely, so that's partly why I'm saying this. So yes, it's analytically based, but right, the note says it's arbitrary based on their experience, and I trust your experience, but what I'm trying to point out is, what does high have to do here versus I'm testing, right, marijuana flower above 0.3% THC, what is high or low amounts of THC playing out here for us in that conversation?
So the idea was, the reason why we had 3 different variants and not just single cannabis is it thought from some of the laboratories, and it wasn't unanimous, but some of them thought that there were different interference in the analytical method by the THC itself. So if you have a lot of THC, it's 10% of the compound that can interfere with your instrument, and you might need a different method or different procedure. You might need to make sure that in the presence of high THC, which is likely to occur in some of the product, that your method is robust enough to compensate for that and still give you accurate results. And as someone that if all you say, well, you just have to validate on over 0.3, so they find a 2% strain, validate against it, it works great, but it might not work great in a 10% or a 20% strain. So they wanted to make the method more robust by saying you have to test the method, which is what these are, in the presence of high THC to make sure the method is effective in that case. And these are basically 3 different cases where you would have to test through method validation that the method performs adequately, and that you'd have to ongoingly prove that it performs adequately through QC if you have that case. So the thought was that these are a known danger of failure, and that you should compensate for it by making sure your method is robust enough to deal with it. And it would not go the other way. You would not say, okay, well, since it works for 10% THC, it's not going to work for 2% THC. The thinking was that no, the error is the more THC is going to make the method more hard. So that if you can succeed in the harder case, it would be robust enough. It was known that marijuana is a highly variable matrix, and so there's a lot of concerns about that. And this was sort of why we had 3 and just saying marijuana to start with, because it was, some people thought, well, no, you wouldn't want to do that. You wouldn't want to have to try much different product. To call all marijuana identical isn't fair to marijuana. It's got a lot of different variations, so there's some QC issues involved. So you would want a more robust thing. None of these, all of these things are trade-offs. There's no, unless you can go to standard editions at great additional cost, there's no real way in the standardized methods that we're running to compensate for the matrix. So all of these are
How do you know which bin the product is in when you get it?
You test it.
So
There's a
isn't
lot
that
of
potency?
re-prepping that goes on of samples to make sure that your dilution is within your calibration
No,
curve.
but how do you know which of these three categories your product is in before you test it?
I mean, you often don't, unless
don't.
the client tells you, and then you have to make
That's
sure
on
that.
the client's basis.
I mean, you have two options, right? You can test it, right, for potency, which you're often going to do anyway, right, because it's going to be part of the suite. But the easiest option is you method develop one method for all three categories, right? Is you don't do any different extraction or cleanup or anything.
It's definitely it's a more robust method if you've made sure that you have accounted for the different interferences. And right here, we're identifying two interferences.
Yep.
THC and CBD.
That is correct.
And I think that's the issue that I take with this, is these seem like this is an arbitrary grouping of cannabis plants based on two interferences. And we've completely omitted some other major interferences that we haven't even described and accounted for here. So I agree. I think a robust method should be able to account for these and other interferences.
Are those others known?
I mean, I could describe some of them to you.
I mean, if you're trying to put a motion forward to have more commodities, that's fine.
But I think that's not a fair description either. Like, if I can identify 10 different interferences that exist in all cannabis plants, I'm not describing 10 different commodity groups. I'm describing 10 different interferences that are present in every single cannabis flower.
Okay.
In the event that they're present in every single flower, then they would show up in every single QC sample and every single.
At varying amounts.
So you would capture that in your method validation if they're in fact ubiquitous.
For sure, I think we should.
So the concern with this wasn't that high THC is not ubiquitous. Is something that could be, you can select to do your method validation on a product that is low of both of these things and that lacks these interference. And it's more than the 0.3 requirement.
Is that what
but
we're trying to
so you
get
can say,
at?
I validated it at 1% THC, 1% THC, and you wouldn't capture it.
But is that what we're trying to capture? Is that what we're that
That was what
labs will be lazy?
This would force you to do it on on these three categories. You would require to make sure that you could have validated
these two interferences, the way I'm seeing it.
and on marijuana itself. So obviously, since you're doing a validation, if there's a ubiquitous one, it would show up in everything, and you would capture that in your validation.
I'm just trying to understand what the value we gain from categorizing versus identifying known interference.
The value you get is you get to use the USD documents that are based on, if a commodity group, you do these three validation steps, and a commodity, you do these three, and add a new commodity, you do if you look at the QC data, it has a big list of, if it's this, you do here's the validation. It needs a LOD study, it needs a,
What criteria does the
so it's
EPA
like,
use?
it's so that you can take the USD document and plug in apples instead of
Okay, so it's to conveniently fit a model.
Yeah,
is the right
to
way.
use the USDA
So
model.
how does the USDA model, or how does the EPA, when using USDA model, identify commodities?
EPA sets them.
And what criteria do they use?
It's totally up to them, but mostly it's like apples or apples.
And your
cherries.
suspicion is that if they
Fruit
were
based
to
fruit.
categorize this commodity group, they would call it a single commodity.
I mean, potential. It's also
Or they call it hemp and cannabis, or they call it hemp and cannabis, or you could do like a CBD, they might even do some version of this where you have strains or varieties and call it varietal change, here's I don't know what they would do because EPA doesn't want to talk about it because it's marijuana.
I mean, it's also experimentally driven, right? So if you run your high THC method, right, and you can recover all your analytes, but then every time you go to CBD, you lose methylbutanol and diuron, right? You obviously are not validated for that change, right? So some of the times it's not commodity for the entire nation, but if the method the lab's running can't get purple asparagus, but it can get green asparagus, it's going to have to revalidate for that new commodity.
It sounds like we've talked to labs within our community that do have problems
Yes.
with one or both of these interference. And definitely they should have internal mechanisms for making sure that they've accounted for that.
I mean,
If they should have it, why shouldn't everybody have it?
Well,
That's
but you just
basically.
said, like, some labs will identify within their own
sure,
process that they have to treat purple asparagus
yeah,
differently,
and
despite the fact that EPA never made that
the
requirement.
work group decided that it was not that much more work, and that the people with methods that could already do this, it was very little extra validation that they would have to do, and it would just be one more day or 2 more days worth of work.
I mean, so then
The work is on the QC is where this is really gonna fly. So it's gonna add extra QC, it's the ongoing,
That's an
big
ongoing
cost.
cost that is.
The method validation has an additional cost for each commodity.
And we're still talking about pesticides and flower here.
Correct.
Right.
But this carries, right? I mean, this definition of a commodity.
Right, I mean,
is gonna carry to all our other methods.
I was really more, like, I think where I was going with that was, you know, being able to quantify the difference between 0.25% THC and 0.35% THC is gonna be a lot more important than can you do, you know, like, higher percentages, but that's, you know, when we get to the codes.
So the,
Conversation.
in practice, the lab is gonna have to obtain, and sort of why we agreed on these arbitrary 10% is because there was some need for the labs to be able to get these as blank matrices to order to run the QC test and run the matrix. So by setting, not trying to have high be super high, having these be, you know, something that's readily obtainable, it means all labs can obtain something that's 10%.
How was the 10% threshold identified?
It was like, can we get
Product
product?
arbitrarily chosen based on we think that we can obtain that.
And it, to the desire to be even, it was like, to get 10% CBD was thought to be hard.
Was there any discussion about the other interference that are known?
It was thought that the method would, the validation steps were adequate to recover that in general, and you can't, it's a trade-off. You can't get a method that's gonna do every single possible interference as a method validation in a widely fired quantity. It has a method validation. We went through the QC and how it does method validation. It has a lot of different scenarios, and if you just, to apply those scenarios, I think you should just look at that data SOP, the QC SOP, and look at what the consequences of calling a commodity, what validation has to be run, and whether you think that's adequate. Because a lot of what you're talking about isn't whether the commodity is adequate, it's like the consequences of the commodity is against these method validation steps. And are those method validation steps valid? Seems to be what you're really talking about. It's like, if I call it a commodity and I do this validation, do I get a validated method?
I think I'm concerned on both fronts. Like, are we adequately capturing the interferences that we're going to encounter? And then on the flip side, are we also just creating extra work for us on an ongoing basis?
What I hear you asking are all interferences equal?
No.
And what I'm hearing you say is not really.
There's the QC report says you start off with a commodity and then a commodity group and a method, and they all have validation things. They say, here's, you need to validate LDs, you need to validate precision accuracy, you need to validate, you know, calibration curves, you need to do ongoing validation. They all have different things that you want to do for that validation. And each commodity group would need to be validated, each method would be validated, but what steps would need to be depend on what you were changing and what commodity group it is. So the intention of the UAS document is that we would try and do robust enough validation, but you recognize that there may still be apples out there or cannabis out there that's not exactly what you validated against. But you do something to try and capture that, and you do have ongoing precision accuracy to try to see whether there's something jumped out at you and is different. But whether the whole method validation scheme is accurate or not is a very complicated question. I think you'd have to look over all of the documents, not just the commodity groupings, to sort of find that information. But without the commodity groupings, it all breaks down. There's no, you have to rewrite something to replace it, because that's how the USD document reads. For a commodity group, you do this validation. If you don't assign cannabis as a commodity group, it's still going to need validation. So you're going to have to write, what do you do? Similarly for the commodity, it says commodities get this validation. If you don't assign cannabis as a commodity, you need to replace that somehow. If it's not a one-to-one, then you need to do more complicated replacement. You need to rewrite what you want.
So I hear, it's not whether or not cannabis flower is a commodity group. I hear the concern more as the, individual commodities within the group. Is that right?
I'm not sure what you mean.
well,
like the high THC, high CBD.
Yeah.
Like the sub-commodity.
The commodities, yeah.
that's where here the concern being, because those are interferences, as there are other interferences as well, not whether or not it should be a commodity group itself. And the question is,
So
are all
you could
interferences?
do it that way too, you say cannabis flower is the commodity group, and cannabis flower is a commodity. And there's-
Is there a
no
way
types.
that we
And
can
that's-
capture the necessary validation, QC work, with that cannabis commodity rather than high THC?
That is capturing it. That would say, now you don't have to do a high THC, you don't have to do high BC, you don't have to do that. If it's cannabis flower, it validates.
And there's no way for us to account for any.
That's what we tried to do
any
here by
interferences.
calling them cannabis type.
Yeah, I guess I'm
So that's what we're saying.
more getting to Nick's point where, is there a way to encompass general interferences rather
That's what
than
the-
specific ones?
Then you would just do cannabis flower, cannabis type, but say the method is supposed to be for general.
Yeah,
So that you would get that by default.
yeah.
You just call cannabis, USDA method is robust validation for a commodity. If it was ubiquitous or common enough or in the things that you were validating, it would show up.
This sounds a lot more robust to me, especially if the client is made aware of what known interferences
But
have been established.
but this is explicitly adding things to it, so
So,
the lab could ignore it if they wanted.
where I'm uncomfortable now is say, we find CBG is an interference.
There are
and-
flowers out there that have over 10% CBG.
Exactly, and then CBC, and now we're in this rabbit hole of, what does myrcene interfere with?
And we also didn't talk about, this doesn't even
Oh.
address acidic forms, which actually our flowers don't have these compounds in more than 10% unless we heat them first.
Yeah.
So this isn't even a representation of what we're gonna do.
Total THC.
But it matters whether it's decarbed or not, right? If I validate against undecarbed, but then I get a decarbed flower.
I mean, hey,
That's how you measure.
if you want 40 commodities,
I
that's
don't
fine.
want 40 commodities.
Well,
but I
you
want
can't
a
have one.
commodity with many different interferences that I need to be robust.
That's what the commodities are. They're different interferences. If you want more interferences, if you want more commodities, that's fine. But you can't say one, because what will happen is,
Say one.
We can't
Hang on a second, go ahead.
what will happen is you will go and find the easiest flower that's ever existed with no interferences, method validate it, and then your QC, whether it passes or not,
Your
during,
assumption is that I'm intentionally.
I'm not saying, I'm saying everybody in this room that is part of the industry has complained that someone is committing fraud, not themselves, right? And the presumption is somebody's cheating or doing something untoward in the industry.
It's extra busy work for us. I think the way to fix it is to be real about what the interferences we're going to experience and make sure that we're accounting for them. This is not adequate for that.
Okay,
So it's not, so if we start, and this is the way I'm picturing it, so I know we're talking about all the other types of interferences, right? So if we say there's possibly, because I'm comfortable admittedly with the 3, right? And with the conversation on how we got to 10%, like why that would be valuable was really helpful to me, because the way I hear this is that there would be the method, and you could have one method that you have validated that encapsulates all of those, and your method, knowing with your subject matter expertise or any of the lab's subject matter expertise, would capture those other interferences that are not specific to
Right.
THC,
So we create that
CBD.
robust method that can.
Right,
handle all
and so this would be the minimum standard, right?
Right, but the ongoing burden that I get, again, with my opinion that these are arbitrary groupings. Now I have extra QCs that I have to run on an ongoing basis. These are, in my opinion, arbitrary QCs that I'm doing, because these may not be the interference that I'm worried about.
So right now, for any lab, right, when you, for the methods you validated, what are the QCs that you run most often, right, on a daily, weekly basis? That you're like, this is the interference, or these are the things I need to make sure that I've accounted for. Is it THC? Is it?
Yeah, can I pass that? Because I think we switch it up,
Yeah.
challenge ourselves.
So what we talk about is in matrix validation, we usually look at a wide variety of matrices, because why do we want to put a non-robust method into production? Because then we're just going to have, it just makes our lives more difficult down the road, right? So we might validate on one matrix, which is usually a blend, because we don't have enough of a single strand of clean material to do a full validation. and we would test a lot of different contents, because to the point, it is highly variable, and we'll see different interferences. I usually do 10 to 15 different types of matrices, and would choose, would look at the potency data and say like, okay, here's some variable ones, so we can kind of see. And if we find out, all our high THC, we're having an issue on accuracy on these 3 pesticides, we would either, have method that if we saw that, we would run an alternative method to verify it, or we would change our core method to correct for it. And then same thing with QC, we typically run almost, 2 to 3 levels of QC, but again, it's a blend of clean matrix, because and that's part of the challenge in anything is finding clean matrix, much less finding clean matrix at 3 different levels. And so now instead of running 3 levels of the blended matrix for every 20 samples, 10 samples, we're running 9, right? So now we're running almost a 1-to-1 or a 2-to-1 sample to QC. So I think if you do a robust method that captures everything, you could run one set of QCs that encompasses the different levels.
Does that make sense, Kendra? Our QC is a blend of many different strains. And that blend also changes through time because we don't have a constant source. So we're constantly challenging ourselves with all of these interference and more, and with a new QC constantly through time. So it's an ongoing challenge of our laboratory. We're not just cherry picking a low percentage flower and using that for an easy task.
Partly the way that I heard that too is that.
But it is you're using one QC sample all the time, so you find one that's good and you keep redoing.
No, but we don't have a sample. We don't have a constant source.
We don't have a constant
source. It changes all the time. It's different day to day.
So this does require you to do 3. It's not 9 times, but you would have to do 3 recoveries if you were getting variable.
But if we're running 3 levels,
we're running 3 levels.
3 levels of QC, and now you're telling me I have to run
No,
3
but no,
levels.
Okay, let's
the document only
on
says
the
you have to
strength
do
committee members,
1
unless
recovery
decided.
per matrix. So it's only 3. It's 2 extra versus, if you were just to do 1 combined, you have to do 1 recovery. This one's giving you 2 more, so 3. So it's 2 extra samples per run at most. And if you were just always running high THC flower, then you would only need the 1 sample. So even in the most robust cases, it's just 2 extra QC samples per run.
But unless we, like you said, unless we want to do multiple levels,
and that's all that's required. You can always do more if you want, but all this document would require you to do is 2.
But I also calibrate.
No, it doesn't require you to calibrate on it.
Okay,
It's just for
just
QC.
verify my recovery.
You have to do a QC recovery for it. So it's most 2 samples.
With 2 extra injections every 35 samples.
Yeah.
For the rest of eternity.
Well,
I'm sitting here feeling like that's arbitrary.
I mean, also if you're running CBD and, right, you could just be running high THC for those 35 samples.
And
Which
it
is the often.
If I knew that and I was sure of that ahead of time,
Sure,
I probably won't be.
potentially. I mean, you might also potency test too.
Really, I'd rather just stick with the third one, the high THC, high CBD blended, because then I'm covering my bases all the time.
So the question was, do they have different effects? And some of the labs thought they had different effects and wanted that to be checked.
Is there a way to wrap this into performance-based criteria for the method?
This is what it is.
This is what that is.
You measure your performance of high THC and you get a result and you go ongoing. You measure performance of high CBD, you get a result and you go ongoing. What do we need to measure the performance of to recognize the commodity? You could say, well, we just need 1 marijuana and that's good for it all. Or you say, or you do some sort of, it has to be blended with high THC. But to make the model documents work, you need to have something. We're going to test this, we're going to get this result, and we're going to, that's where how we're going to generate the data. So if you do this, you're going to end up generating data, ongoing performance data for 3 different things, assuming you run everything, and then you'll be able to track ongoing. What's my performance for THC? What's my performance for IBC? What's my performance? Plus, you'll have the method validation, so you'll be able to sort of say if you're having an issue with one of them, it'll show up in the data, and it'll show up in the data that could be audited or reviewed, because part of this is generating data that will be available then. Here's a performance requirement. We're going to have an auditor come in and look at it. Obviously, if you're not generating the data, it can't be reviewed. So this is also generating data that can be reviewed by the.
So in order to incorporate these,
but
these interferences in particular,
it is essentially arbitrary. I mean, it's correct.
We have to have commodity.
3 mind, that was what happened in the task force.
So you can't incorporate, these interferences and the other ones that Nick's talking about, through performance-based criteria without creating
Well,
these
if you think they're
subclasses.
separate interferences, if you think they behave separately, then you have to have them separate. If you think high CBHC behaves fundamentally differently than high CBD, and you're gonna get different numbers, and they behave fundamentally different than blending them together, then the blending them together will give you just the ones for the blending them together. If you think, no, that's not true, I can blend them together and get all the interferences all at once, then you could do that. And we don't have data on it. So I think some of this is we are relying on sort of anecdotal evidence of some labs said something. And I do know that, I would much prefer to have, we did a study, and it shows definitely that marijuana has these interference characteristics.
Yeah, I'm feeling like,
I didn't have that. We didn't have that. So we did sort of, this sounds good to us, but that really is what it is. It was something that sounded good to
Okay.
the task force.
I feel like we've had some really good discussion, and I missed our break at 10 o'clock. So, let's all take a 10-minute break and, come back at, 10:35. And we will get back to the discussion.
Okay.
Motions, I feel like we've pretty much, I feel like all the questions that were asked about the commodities group, and there was a good, healthy discussion, but I think we need to move on. Is there any more information? I mean, whether or not anybody convinced anybody of a position is a different question. Is there any more information that needs to be shared before we move on? And we'll get to the voting on the motion later today.
And I think, like Nick's getting to, and Kendra mentioned some data on this, and I don't know how we can ask for that or get that, but it seems to make an informed decision on this.
I'd be much more compelled to vote in the affirmative if we could have some justification that was data-driven.
Okay, well, we can, so we do have a structure to handle motions where there's a difference of opinion. We can still vote, and we've committed to having all the, the pros and cons outlined in the report. So, okay. So the next motion, is.
And then before we hop to the next
Yeah.
big section, I just wanted to acknowledge that as part of this motion there, that we just discussed 1A, part 1B of that is that, the motion would establish the client, the Washington State client would replace the EPA in the designating of commodities. So, while we're talking about what would be a possible initial structure, it basically says that the client in the future would be the entity responsible for adding or reducing or all that. So I just wanted to acknowledge that was sitting there as well.
I did have actually one more question, and I think we took care of it technically, but in terms of like, where would a low THC, low CBD sample fall in this hierarchy? In terms of method validation, we're not worried about it because it should be incorporated in the high THC, high CBD model, but where would that fall?
Yeah, it's a good question, and it actually is absent in the document. So I think,
Yeah, we would have to have a fourth commodity.
you probably would want to just throw it into one of the boxes.
Okay.
And just say that it's equivalent to, either say it's equivalent to any of them, or say it's equivalent to, high THC.
Because the interferences are missing.
Yeah, so you could say that it's just as good as. I think, in terms of, it's sort of like when you put it in terms of tracking its ongoing method performance.
Yeah.
What box to add it to.
Absolutely, my question.
So yeah, I think that is a deficiency of the motion, and that you'd have to add something to define.
Well, the motion hasn't been made yet. This is just
Of the
draft
proposed
motion.
motion.
the draft motion.
I'm sorry, I said the deficiency word. It's just laboratories like to do this. But yeah, I think that is, addition that would be helpful to that clarification.
Sort of in everything else.
It does sort of, it defines high, it defines CBD, but what if you get a product that's, 8% THC and no noticeable CBD, what do you call it? And I think that also goes to the clarity of what do you call the difference between, THC, THCA, what if it's all the acidic form, and how do you compensate for that? So I think, there could be some it would be helpful to have that clarified. Yeah. Both of those are absent.
I mean, we could potentially call hemp. I guess that could potentially be high CBD though. That's just the only other kind of housekeeping thing I can think of in here is that
Hemp will probably get an EPA designation. They will probably add
separate from cannabis flower.
They'll probably add it to Group 99. And it'll probably stay in Group 99 for a decade.
What is Group 99?
Miscellaneous. Because they'll have to go through federal rulemaking.
That's a commodity group.
Yeah.
You put together a method and all that.
It has, so, you'll also say that we do two things in this. We designate the commodity group, and there's later things that designate as marker commodities. A commodity group will usually have one or two markers, and a commodity group can have subgroups, so they'll have markers for the subgroups. And so EPA will validate the commodity group and then validate the subgroups of what they're related to. So miscellaneous basically just ends up with a huge number of subgroups. And it really has to do with the ability of EPA to make federal rules. It takes them 5 years to change the name of the commodity. So, and much like opening a state rule, they don't want to open them all at one time. So they're like, oh, we're going to concentrate on commodity group 1B or commodity group 2A or something, and then spend quite a bit of time redefining it. They just made a new commodity group for herbs, and that took them 5 years. So just structurally, they have the same sort of governmental structure as rulemaking state rules. It's not something you flip a switch and it happens.
Okay, should we go into the roles? Any discussion on the roles? I know there will be.
As you get started on this one, on motion 2, Mike, I just wanted to do a real quick clarification, because we've got motion 3, which is the QA officer, which we talked about at the last steering committee meeting. Motion 2 are additional to that. They are not part and parcel of the QA officer, right?
So each of them defines a role. So there's three roles. These are all pulled directly out of the PDP admin document, and our ideas. The other documents refer to the technical program manager shall do this, the quality officer shall do this, the administrative manager shall do this, but we never define who that is and what that means. And so that came from the documents from the admin SOP. So our thought is to make the things read clear and consistently throughout, that you would pull out the relevant parts of the admin, which are the definition of role and the things we discussed previously about the QA unit, and say, okay, these are what these mean. Here's how you know who the TPM is, and you have to, and the nuts and bolts of it, you have to have a TPM, you have to designate a TPM, and then that person is responsible for doing all the technical program manager work in the other SOPs. So it sort of doesn't make any sense to have the QC document say the technical program manager shall approve this method if there's no technical program manager exists. What is the technical program manager? Without, it's sort of a missing component. So the idea with these three roles is just to say, here's what USD considers these roles are, and here's what they are. So you'll need somebody that's going to do the technical program role, somebody that's going to do the admin role, somebody and a quality assurance unit that's going to have a quality assurance role as part of it. So this is just directly pulling out of the USDA roles. Here's what the roles are in USDA, and pushing them into this system to say the labs will have thing. And then when you read the data SOP or the QC SOP or the lab op SOP, and it says the technical program manager does this, or the quality assurance unit does this, or the admin manager does this, you'll know who that was and what that means. And that the auditor can go, did you say in your documents that Adam Smith is the technical program manager, and the data says that the technical program manager has to sign off on this? Where is that?
So for the motions in 2 specific to these additional roles, this particular motion is that It's a role, not a person, right? So I could operate in both of these roles if the lab so chose for these two.
These two roles are not competitive. They are competitive with QA. But,
Okay, so
well, they're
technical
actually
and admin.
technical. So,
So I could be both technical and I could be admin, or motion number 2, because I know we talked quite at length about the unique difference about QA, but just for technical and admin, you could be the same person as long as the lab has a position that fulfills the role, the function.
I'll take this even further. Could the QA manager be this?
Have both of those roles as well.
Yeah.
no, they cannot. So they have to be separate. The QA manager has to be separate from the technical program manager.
That's spelled out somewhere.
The
Motion number 3.
motion number, well, the definition of, so it's in the USD admin SOP document. And it defines the quality assurance unit, and the quality assurance unit has to be separate from the other managerial unit. And the quality assurance unit has to have at least one quality assurance officer who's part of the unit. So the USD documents do envision that you could have a quality assurance unit with as many people as you want in it, but it has to be at least one, but it has to be its own unit. So you could have, a large lab could have a quality assurance unit with a quality assurance manager and 20 employees, and the small lab could have just the quality assurance unit.
And my understanding is that the quality assurance officer cannot be involved in any amount of production, whether that be bench work at the laboratory or data review or preparing solvents.
No, the quality assurance manager is mandated to do data review. So all data must be approved by the after the analyst has completed their work and done their conclusion, then
But does that mean production data though? So
the quality assurance requirement has to approve all the production data.
all the production data.
So two people have to look at it. The technical program and the quality assurance have to both review it. So an analyst has to review it and the quality assurance unit has to review it before you approve the data.
Okay.
So it could be the analyst, the technical program manager, or someone assigned by the technical program manager who's part of the technical program manager's unit, not the quality assurance unit.
Right. That was like the first pass.
Reviews it. And the quality assurance unit reviews it prior to release.
Okay.
And the quality assurance unit also has quality assurance, ongoing performance requirements, quality assurance data,
Efficiency
all
testing.
the stuff in there. It does review, but it's not going to perform the test.
Gotcha.
So the technical program manager performs the test for designee and the quality assurance unit.
The quality assurance officer is precluded from doing any wet work pursuant to production,
Quality assurance, quality assurance is
which
not.
includes preparing solvents, all that.
The quality assurance unit is not. No, the quality assurance unit cannot review the unit's own work. So if it's for testing, then the quality assurance unit would have to be reviewing somebody else's work. So you can't review yourself.
And then additionally, they're precluded from being the technical program manager.
Which is the same. It's the same thing. If you were about the technical program manager, it's the person who does the actual work.
Okay.
But it also says technical program manager has to be competent. So your technical program manager has to be competent to perform the work, but could have like a lab tech that isn't a scientist, but is competent enough to do the task that they outlined.
Are we still having a lab director position?
So the
Replacing that?
the most similar to lab director is administrative manager. So
Would this combination of the two replace?
the administrative manager is is the third thing we define. Administrative manager does budgeting, contracting, purchases, inventory management,
Yeah.
reporting. It's very much more like a lab manager or owner role.
Yeah, I'm more wondering, so we currently have this lab director
The
position.
science director.
Science directors,
Science, yeah.
is that being replaced by these two, or are these two in addition to?
So you just have to designate somebody as it. So you can have whatever your own internal laboratory structure is, but you say, you're the technical program manager, you're the admin manager, you're the QA manager, you're part of the QA unit, you're the QA.
It's more about assigning the roles.
Who's doing the role, and then the role has to be, you have to have a separate QA role. So if you're assigning somebody to the QA unit, then they're part of the QA unit, they're not part of the rest of the laboratory work. If you assign somebody technical program manager, they're gonna have to sign off on the scientific accuracy of a bunch of stuff. So you need somebody who's technically competent for you to be a technical program manager. You can have a bean counter as your admin manager, just make sure the budget's right.
So why did this motion come before the steering committee? Is there contention?
No, what it was is we did not want to put the whole USDA admin SOP before the committee because most of it was irrelevant. And so instead of saying, oh, we want USDA admin and then a summary of changes, we went, really what we just want out of admin is to define these three roles.
These three roles.
And we don't want to define the roles in USDA, what the program, we don't want to define how you federally make sure you use the GSA 49 form when you order something. It was, we wanted to define these three roles, and that's all we needed out of the admin SOP. So we just pulled these three sections out of the admin SOP and put those forward instead of putting the whole SOP with plus revision.
Among the table here, is there any dissent to this? I don't hear any, make a motion.
We'll do the motions, and we'll do them all at once.
Will
So
there
move on to number 4 then.
Educational requirements for those roles?
They say that there's no specific educational requirements, but they have the big, they must be technically competent or conform that they did.
Whatever that means.
Whatever that is. And they don't say you have to have a certain degree or a certain approval. It is administered, testing of cannabis. We don't really have a engineering board that say you have to have this certification to prove that you're competent in this field. So, certainly, if you want to add some more requirements to it, but all the roles really do about what you do, who does it, and the separation is probably the most contentious part of them. There were people that wanted the QA officer and the technical program manager to be, so you can have a one-man lab, or to speed up your review, because, have one person turn the data out. This is going to be, you need somebody else to show up to review your data. So, it's a personnel issue in terms of on-site turnaround time and so forth. So if the QA wants to do a substantial review, then that's the cost.
Okay, so, and then moving on to the last one, I think that was the one we talked about first. And that was the one that we, kind of agreed to some steps on how we were gonna move forward to bring that to conclusion. So are there any other updates from the analytical work group?
That's what we had substantially. We had commodity group definition, we had the roles out of admin to complete the review of admin, and then we had the entire summary of all of the large list of modified recommendations for unanimous. So unless you have something specific, one of the pros and cons of the specific one of those sub-recommendations.
And I think we spent the morning talking about that.
Well, we talked about them in general. If you want to get more into the weeds, that's fine. But that's all we would have.
Okay, I mean, I want to give because we moved the motions down, so everything kind of bumped up a little bit. So I want to give the proficiency testing work group a chance to give us their update. And then if we have extra time, we can go back to specifics.
The proficiency testing work group has not met since the last steering committee meeting, because much of the work that the proficiency testing work group needs to do is based on these decisions of the analytical work group. Some of these things are driving the proficiency testing work group. Do you have anything you want to add to that, Sarah?
And then just the entire proficiency testing program, is mostly part of the second report, and this is delineated on pesticides in cannabis flowers. So if there's something something that can be added to this one, that makes sense. The analytical work group, pretty much struck section
9 that's in the, PDP document, but most of that stuff is already contained in rule, and it describes practices just going to the California Department of wherever to get, or the FAFSAs.
So
PTFA.
the PT samples, under the USC documents are basically two sources. There's a EU source of PT samples, FAFSAs, which has a very large number of laboratories, but you can only get what they want. Right? They pick it based on the EU list, and you get the commodities they choose. They have a large number of them. They choose 12 or 13 commodities a year, but they're just what they have for their commodities. And so USDA also has California State Lab produce PT samples for the pesticide data program that have exactly what they want, but obviously much smaller studies. So they do both. They require both studies, the general study and
That was scratched.
but the work group said, well, this is the other task force's issue. We were tasked not to do this. We're not going to include it at all. So they just struck the whole section and said, oh, this wasn't our duty. So we'll just defer to the other work group.
So, and then being a part of both work groups, I pressed and said, okay, what is, what from all the pesticide chemists that are sitting here in this room and not in the other room, what, is there a requirement? Is, the PT group can just say 10%, is that going to be enough to test the robustness of your validation? You're going down these lines of, validating three ways, is 10% good enough, or can you just use a concentrate? Is there any requirements? And the final concept that was sent to me was the best, and which would model after what is being done with the California Department and the FAFSAs, is incurred pesticides, which
What?
incurred pesticides. So cannabis flower with incurred pesticides. So
Explain what incurred means.
incurred is applied to the cannabis while it's growing, and then exhibit themselves
Real world.
Yes.
like real world.
Not
So-
like you get flour.
Right.
Yeah.
That's-
So
yeah,
for us to
incurred
come
is-
up
That's what occurred.
with a quick solution for that to get into this report seems a little premature. We think there's quite a few challenges to making that happen right now within this report. So that is the recommendation, and that's something that I think we should support. However, the work group hasn't had a chance to meet to discuss what a program looks like with this concept, or even what's a quick solution to get this moving forward.
Who would grow it? Okay.
Does it incur?
So
And the other option was a
lot of
PT provider like the presentation we
Concur.
had, an external PT provider like the presentation that we had last time.
Yeah, that's not.
not like, yeah.
So, I mean, there's several things that are, could be on the table. If you thought it was just important to have, cannabis flower, evaluated, and then you could put, pesticides on top of it. Not perfect, but if you wanted to get that matrix, then that's your option probably right now, and if you wanted incurred pesticides, well, then maybe there is a, hemp that's coming on to the market at some point that may have incurred pesticides. That you could say, if it's twice a year requirement, one of them will use the model where you have the actual matrix, but you spike on top. And then the second one would be a requirement that you use some other incurred, pesticide matrix. I mean, there's a few avenues, but not one that, I think we've fully, thought about.
So they would all be described in the report with a recommendation for,
So this is just pesticides with, and if you look at the House bill, it's recommendations, what is it again, pertaining to the,
I'd have to pull it up.
Pesticides in flower.
yeah,
Yeah, but she's
there's a very specific,
mentioning the
Yeah.
language of the House bill, that says something along the lines of recommendations pertaining to proficiency testing
Yeah.
programs.
so what would worry me is that we make an overstep of a recommendation, without having, the consequence of, what that might do for a whole program. So we made a little too far just to cover something for the pesticide and didn't think about the program and didn't think about the next report that we have and all the other work that are gonna come and do work. So if we just said, but that was it. Is there any consequence down the road, or if we were to say, we didn't meet, we did not meet, in this time. So, but a meeting, there should be a meeting in January, with the new PT, chemist. Back to start.
That's right, can you update us on that?
I do,
I forgot to,
and, there's a slide, actually, we have the slides for the new,
Which one is it called?
chemist that we're hiring. I'm not sure what Alyssa called it.
What's the last name?
Zabrowski, yes.
There we go.
Yeah, so, we finally have hired, our proficiency testing chemist, the person who will lead that work group. I apologize, it has taken such a long time, to get this person on board, but our person is Ryan Zabrowski, and he's an organics chemist up at, Test America in Tacoma. And Ryan, has been working in the volatiles and semi-volatiles group, and recently was named as the acting lab director. So he's had I was very impressed with his resume. He's been on a fast track to the top at the Test America laboratory. I think you guys will be really pleased with what he brings to the steering committee, and I can share this. I can send this all to you guys in email, but he sent a bio, shared some personal information. He grew up in Steilacoom. His parents both work in laboratories, which he didn't include that, but I thought it was just kind of interesting that he kind of grew up in the laboratory world. He has a bachelor's in environmental science from University of Washington, and he had a lot of good experience. You can read a little bit more about it there. Working on the TPH, weathered diesel 8260 methods, gas range organics methods, then moved over to semi-volatile organics. And he talked a lot about organotins in his interview, so he's been working on those methods a lot. So he will be starting with us on January 6th. That'll be his first day. He needs to wrap up things since he's been running the lab over there and kind of transfer things over. But I think that he'll be able to help us, and kind of what I see happening with the proficiency testing portion of the report is Sarah including some of the criteria that we've heard from folks, some of the basic criteria of what folks are looking for. And then in the next report, when we have more information, at least from the pesticides group, we'll have analytical requirements. I don't know if we're going to be able to come up with something that's actually realistic now. So I think there may be, in my mind, I think we might end up with kind of two different tracks. There's what folks really want, like the incurred pesticides, and then what we can do now that would be an improvement. Because what you're really talking about, if you're talking about, the ideal proficiency testing program is building a state program from scratch or something along those lines. It doesn't exist in the market now. So that's kind of how I'm, future telling magic 8-ball prediction here. But, that's kind of my thought on it.
Would the client have a role in that? So could take the recommendation if they chose to, on what we can do now, and then can move to a different model as the state created that kind of capacity.
I think that the client would have an important role.
Okay. So is that it for the proficiency testing work group? Okay, so now we're ahead of schedule.
Yay.
Great. That's all right. We'll soldier on. So we want to talk about the client update. So this is going to be fairly short as well. I think that we did remind me, did we make a motion that there should be a client? We did. That was an early motion.
Yes, I believe at the last steering committee meeting,
Okay.
we had a motion about that.
And then we asked the agencies to get together and come to us with some options, or at least to work on this problem. And I think the update is that the agencies are still discussing what the client looks like and who should be represented there and how that's going to work. And it's not something that is just we're talking about things that we don't have the authority to bestow authority. Only the legislature does. So we're continuing just to have those discussions and to work on that. And I don't know that we have a whole lot of specifics to add at this point. Does any other agency want to comment on if I missed something, or did I capture that pretty well? Okay. So that brings us to next steps. And we're going to finish this before lunch.
Well, we'll need to do our motion
Yeah.
at the end.
Yeah, we're going to do our motions at the end. Okay, so on the next steps, the timeline, again, so back in, was it October, September, at the legislature asked if we could shorten the timeline of this work so that it wouldn't happen until, right now this work is scheduled to culminate in accreditation coming to ecology with everything in place in 2024. And the legislature was interested in can we speed that up, because there's an industry out there that is in need of this product, and how can we do that more quickly? So we're caught in between we can do it immediately if we don't make any changes, and but that's not going to meet the goals of what we're trying to accomplish here. And then there's the more we get to work we get to do, the more upgrades we get to add to the current process. So you can always stop anywhere and say, well, we've made some improvements, and but they may not be all the ones that we want to make. So
Is there anybody in particular in the legislature pushing us to move quicker?
the request came specifically from Representative Young.
Representative Young.
Yeah.
And what does quicker mean?
Yes.
That wasn't defined. It was
Seeing the 2024 end date and feeling like that's too far away.
there were some comments made during that legislative session. You'd have to go to the record to get the names of who's.
Generally speaking at those committees, saying,
Okay.
hey, we need to make this go as quickly as possible. So that's
Yep.
why I'm saying, because I
I
can
mean,
reach out to
it's been voiced by a lot of people. I feel like it's fair to state that, we're gonna, this report is due in July, yeah? So that'll be about a year of our work done in July. This is a short legislative session in 2020, so there's probably nothing from our work is gonna make it in, no matter what we do. So come July of 2020, we have our report done on pesticides and flower. That's a great amount of work that our committees have accomplished. And then 2021 is a long session. Like, that's probably the opportunity where there could be legislative change specifically to pesticides and flower, which is probably the most, delicate and intricate part of the need. So it may be fair to get back to Representative Young and say, we are on a timeline to actually create change in the next legislative session, 2021.
So that's good thoughts, and keep those good thoughts coming. So let me just tell you what the thinking has been so far, and in terms of this, because we made a commitment to bring this up at the task force and to come back to him with an update by the end of the year. So this is our last chance to meet on this. So good thing that we have some time to talk about it. So looking at the timeline and how we're operating, it seems to me that there might be a couple, maybe an efficiency opportunity for us. So I'm not just thinking about 2020 and pesticides and plants, but, the entire project. And so that brings us to, I think on the timeline, that our work is sort of sequentially staged out, which means that we wouldn't start the next group until after the report's written and submitted in July of 2020. So we have 6 months now. The analytical work group is completing their work, and so we could start the next. There's nothing says we can't start the next one. We've kind of addressed that a little bit. So that's a commitment on everybody's part.
Because we're gonna have more meetings.
To not take a break. That's kind of why we set up the schedule for the next 6 months and picked our dates for the next 6 months, anticipating that we were just gonna keep marching on as we go, so we can save some time there. But it's a little bit hard to say exactly how much time we're gonna save, because the next groups are heavy metals and potency in products.
And other,
Those are the
right?
required
There's also an and other.
And that's a very big task. And I was hoping that what we came up with for pesticides and plants could bleed over and give us a leg up on the next work, but it's such a different, just the discussion we had this morning about the commodities group and how you have to have differences there. The USDA may not have a series of 5 SOPs that we can adapt to potency and heavy metals in products. So
That's actually a pertinent question. Does the commodities decision that we make now translate throughout the whole process?
it's for pesticides and plants, I believe. That's
So
the
I think
recommendation.
what you could use it for is if you wanted to go, say, let's add another commodity group, say oil or catter or something, you probably could do the same sort of logic behind it.
But it would still be pesticides.
It would still be pesticides.
We're not applying
If
that
you're-
commodity necessarily.
Probably for heavy
No.
metals, you're gonna have to jump out of USDA and jump into EPA. Ecology probably has more experience in that too, and do a general method for metals. You might try and do AOAC, agricultural metals methods, but you probably could get away with you probably have to jump models, jump to EPA. For potency is a little, the USDA model is really for trace pesticides. You can say, well, potency, they're just like pesticides, they're small molecules, but they're not trace. You're trying to do for precision of measurement.
Yes, we need precision.
And there's really no precision of measurement QC steps in the USDA in terms of they're all in terms of trace, where you're expecting to have high variability because you're looking at such a low level. They're not in terms of this is 10.2%, you want to know whether it's not 10.3%.
So whether we have to switch model or we stick with that model and have to.
You'd have to either add a lot of
narrow
stuff
all those.
for potency, you'd have to add some, and you probably could get away with, you probably want to remove a bunch of trace stuff that really doesn't apply to, you already know it's there, why worry about an undetected when it's 2%? So yeah, it would be more challenging to adapt to potency. On the other hand, potencies, you're only testing for 4 things. So, I don't know whether you want to test, I don't know whether you want a potency for 20 things or any number of things.
A lot of labs are running.
So you could probably get away with, so that's the discussion of what the scope of the potency is. It's probably going to help
Well, what was the
describe your
scope of our pesticides was the requirements in WAC, right? We had 61 compounds.
Yeah, all right.
Nope. And so what's in WAC is only 4 compounds, and those others are interference, in my opinion.
For heavy metals.
Well, for
For
potency.
Oh, for potency, all right.
The other cannabinoids, CBG, for example,
Yeah,
that's
and
interference.
if you don't have a good enough method to resolve them, then yeah.
So, on the other hand, you might go switch all the way back to just, we wanted a pesticides, we wanted to have a method that was performance-based. You could actually do an actual method for potency, and maybe that's the model that you want. So I think you'd have to go back and ask that discussion too.
EOAC has a performance-based
You could say,
criteria
here's the method that you're supposed to run for potency, and everybody runs the same method, and not be performance-based, but
Here's
method-based.
adding your other compound, something like that.
I think that's a discussion that whatever that work group has is gonna have to have.
Well, I think you really answered part of my question, and that this is, the work we've done is really pesticides, flour,
I think it would
and
work.
it's,
I think it would work for shatter, for oil, for,
but we have to talk about that
like,
before we
bait
make.
pens. I think that would be a lot easier to shoe in quickly into this pesticide to add them as commodity groups. You'd have the same discussion that we had with commodities. Is it a group? How many do we have? You know, do we need extra ones? Do you need, is oil in, this solvent different than oil in that solvent? And, well,
Which eventually we're gonna have to get to that point,
but
right?
it will fit in this model. It'll fit in the USDA model.
That'll be just be a commodities discussion in
The
pesticides.
potency thing would fit in this model, but would need changes to the validation structure and changes to the thing. But the reporting structure, QC structure would all fit. If you wanted a performance-based, and everybody has their own method, if you wanted to say, everybody's gonna run this potency method, which is supposedly what we're doing now, where everybody's supposed to be running this green book method. But for EPA, I think you've got another opportunity to just grab a known set of performance and use it. Just grab EPA solid waste methods or grab AOAC's methods.
For metal.
For metal. And not,
Yeah, I think AOAC has a performance-based potency method as well.
so, but for all products. So, yeah. So you might be able to grab, you know, like you say, just grab AOAC's method, we're gonna run AOAC's method. And then call that good, and then try and work around USDA's to define roles if you want.
So we're not trying to get to the answer today. Just trying to look at what I hoping for is, thinking that I've done on trying to shorten our timeline and work on efficiencies. Are there some other ideas out there that I haven't thought about?
Yeah, so, I mean, if there's a lot of things that overlap with shatter, you know,
Yeah, I think
stuff
that's
like
the
that,
easiest
would
way
that
to-
be the most
to run it
natural
in.
progression, is to start the work group on now other product types?
For pesticides.
With pesticides, yeah.
That's what I was
pretty
gonna
small.
suggest too, is in thinking about our next steps, I'm thinking a lot about the work group structure and the expertise that's at the table, and I would suggest, kind of support what you're
Because we're
saying.
gonna change
I
that
just
work group.
Leverage off the work that's already been done, well, it's fresh in everyone's mind and in the steering committees, and just continue on to pesticides and other
Get
things.
the box checked, and then we
Yeah.
can move on to
I mean,
something else.
technically, you know, according to the bill, our only requirements that we absolutely must accomplish are the pesticide and plant potency and metals. But I feel
Okay.
confident that we can tackle the other things quickly, like Mike and you're saying, because just leveraging the work that's already been done. So that's what I would suggest. Keep those people at the table while they're there, and continue on to the
So you're talking about pesticides in products?
And other products.
pesticides and other things besides.
Is that translate to products, other things? Or,
How would you guys say it,
Yeah.
product?
Yes.
Okay.
The bill says what, products, I don't know.
And
the
did
bill
they
says
decide to do
pesticides
that
and
at the last
plants.
bill doesn't say it.
But then
This
in the
is-
second
It says other,
wave, it says
right?
potency, heavy metals, and other.
We talked about it.
The real
Let me
question
check
is, do you wanna do
Products.
food? Because that's where you're gonna start getting some, you're gonna have to start pulling in some FDA, which is, you're gonna use ice cream and so forth. Because if you go all the way to food, there's a whole bunch more issues that are gonna come up.
If we're talking
So-
pesticides,
If you're talking pesticides. So if you run to,
or are we
if
looking
you
at?
run to
requirements?
extracts and shatter and those sort of, manufactured products, like what would you consider an agriculture to be, raw agriculture product goes to a manufactured product like a, extract or a shatter, but not all the way to.
Well, at the moment, we don't have anything in rule, and I don't think we anticipate anything in rule that would create a pesticide requirement for edibles. So maybe it's
So
not something for us
unless you go to
to.
USDA food safety stuff, so Brad can probably tell you about that, but.
Weren't you guys requiring pesticides in all
But-
products?
So that's what I was just saying, is
But if it's product, so you want to define product maybe a little more to see whether you mean, like, the shatter oil, extract,
We
vape
call those
pen,
raw agricultural.
or do they mean anything that CBD or THC can be used on? This is like CBD, lozenges and brownies and THC ice cream and whatever, the whole range, or do you want a narrower set of products? I think that would be helpful to the work group in trying to figure out what it needs to do.
So the bill says, this first report is pesticides in plants. And then for the second report, it says, including but not limited to heavy metals in and potency of products. That's what the bill says.
The bill doesn't talk about pesticides in all products.
It does not talk about pesticides in all products.
The including but not limited
So
to.
we can choose to do that.
And we
But
can
I-
also anticipate some rulemaking potentially coming from LCB requiring pesticides in all products.
There should be something filed by the beginning of the year or something.
Maybe we table that till our next meeting, until we know exactly what the scope of products is for pesticides.
So just want to make sure that if, in the interest of shortening our timeline, if we're going to add things in the group,
In the time
let's make sure that we get to the minimums first, because and then in terms of the rulemaking, you don't want to open rules and close rules and open and close and open and close. So we kind of need at least one package, and so when that is initiated, that process is, there's a time frame there.
Yes, edible pesticides.
We did include the first motion in the 1B, that the client could add new commodities. So this will allow us, in theory, the client could just take all of this and say, oh yeah, I'm gonna add a new commodity, it's gonna be shatter, it's gonna be oil, it's gonna be juice, or some, vape pen product, or it's gonna be brownie.
Almost we could save ourselves the time and not even discuss it.
You could say that the client does have that flexibility. And I think it'll work for some of the purest or most refined versions, if you're just going to take cannabis and refine it more. But if you're going to start adding it to other ingredients, sort of the cooking part, then you're going to start having to think about the method validation requirements of flour and sugar and canola oil or whatever they're cooking.
Flour with a U, as opposed to with a W. Okay.
Yeah, or whatever they're going to, it could be anything.
Right.
So it's like and then that's an analytical interference you have to deal with. What do you do with high fat samples? What do you do with, they have their own analytical issues, and a lot of the methods that would work great for dried flour might not work for milk, because it's the proteins in the high fat, there's no interference correcting for. So if you go to an FDA certification, you'd have to have some extra work.
So to the question of the rule, a lot of folks are aware that LCB's been working on a rules that connect heavy metals and pesticides, and yes, that's what I was doing as we had this conversation, looking at the draft. Yes, pesticides is part of the edible category that requires testing in a future state in the draft. And one of the things as well, we had met recently about that draft of the rule, because it really is the intention that we get that in a place that they become real in this next calendar year. Is where we were able to, some of the recommendations that the steering committee and the work groups have moved forward, if it fell within the bounds of what this rule was open for, we put some language in on a couple things. So for those of you when that draft comes out, we'll see where it goes, right? There'll still be at least one more round of public comment on these rules, but testing as is, we put it in, and a couple other things. Again, in the place that we thought, for what the rule was open for, that we could reasonably make those suggestions, that should be in the next draft that goes out for folks to see.
The document hasn't been released yet.
No, it hasn't been released as of yet.
Another issue that will come up if we go to edibles is the other ingredients may have pesticide tolerances on them. So if you have blueberries, you'll have pesticides that are illegal to be used on blueberries, and part of your product, well, did it come from the cannabis or did it come from the blueberries? So FDA has sort of rules on how they deal with it, and we may not be able to use them because we're dealing with cannabis. So we may have some more issues there.
So So Jessica, you were talking about the structure of the work groups. Do you want to continue that?
I can talk a little bit more, yeah, you read my mind. So one of the things, you know, we could continue, like Jeff and Mike were saying, to do pesticides and other things. We could also, I think when we go to potency, there's going to be so much interest. I think that's one of the things we've heard from the laboratories, is all the issues around potency and how it's being done, and drying and not drying and all of that stuff. So I think in the interest of being open and transparent, that we're going to have to go back out to solicit new work group members when we go to potency, because this time when we solicited for members, we were really looking for pesticide chemists. So everything was kind of weighted towards the laboratories that are doing pesticides and getting those chemists on the team. But everybody's doing potency, as far as I know. So I think we'll have to re-solicit for that. And then with the work groups, I'd like to see the steering committee stay the same. And then for metals, obviously that's going to be completely different work group. We're going to want more metals chemists in there. So something to think about, at least with potency. You're still doing organic, so probably some of the same folks, but I think we'll need to re-solicit for both of those groups.
So we'll probably start that process pretty quickly.
I guess if we need to figure out, once we know what we're going to do in what order, unless I missed something, I'm not clear if we've landed on that. We haven't even talked about micro. I mean, that's on the including group.
It's
It's not listed on the bill, but it would be.
not listed in the bill, it's in the report, it's not in the bill. Right?
What? Micro?
Not limited to,
Not
so,
listed
and,
too. Right. It's
yeah,
not
I
listed
think it's
too.
something that needs to be addressed.
Yeah.
I would also posit that mycotoxins is a subject that needs to be addressed and may be appropriately addressed by the pesticide committee.
Okay, so maybe if we did, maybe mycotoxins, you could keep the same.
Same committee for
Oh.
mycotoxins, we're still
That'd be
talking
good.
about trace level contaminants.
So what about
It would be good for us to try to decide today, so we can figure whether we're soliciting.
We are
groups,
currently.
continuing
Well,
on.
you can test for
or-
them,
we need leads for each of those.
Right.
there's the test kits, which are,
The unvalidated roamer kits, yeah.
there's the validated ones, there's just the validated, aflatoxin test kit. So, but for grain, but not for cannabis.
Oh, yeah, they're validated for other commodities, yeah.
And I doubt we could get AOAC to validate it for cannabis. You could ask them, but it'd probably cost a lot of money.
So,
But we're gonna self-validate anyway. That was always gonna happen. Unless, we could talk about that too. Do we wanna do a multi-lab study for the potency or for the aflatoxins or one of these? Nobody's really talked about whether we should do an interlaboratory study of method validation. All the USDA stuff is for internal laboratory method validation. I guess you could do interlaboratory if you wanted. That's usually how they're validating the toxin test kits.
okay, so let's start capturing some of
They're
it.
cheap and fast, and you do them in the field. That's why the grain likes them. But somebody's gonna bring them up.
I'm just gonna put down all the ideas. So this one, I'm gonna put a check mark by, and we have. Mike, don't run my dreams.
I'm ruining your dream.
Damn it.
I take it it's time prohibitive to have multiple work groups going at the same time?
No,
I don't
we
think
can,
it's
we can
off
do it
the
if we
table
can
at all.
get the,
Because I keep coming back to this idea that if we change up the work group, the pesticides group, and then we go to heavy metals, and then we go back to pesticides, and then we go, like if we're doing
Could
this
be time
thing.
lost, yeah.
Yeah, and it's inefficient. Whereas if we can focus the pesticide group and keep them going, we'll save time that way.
Mycotoxin or microtoxin?
Myco, M-Y.
MY. in?
Product? All the product, yep.
Okay. So these are now things that we're talking about.
No.
What else did I hear? Microbe?
Micro.
Microbiological.
Might as well throw residual solvents up there while we're.
Terpene.
Not required. We don't talk about terpenes.
Terpenes, yeah.
Is each one of these a separate work group, or are some of these going to be, combined into?
I think mycotoxin in products belongs with the pesticide group.
I mean, again, if you're doing it like by LC triple quad,
Yeah.
yes, I agree 100%. But if you are doing them by Romer,
Then what?
whatever, I don't know.
Whatever.
No, it's not whatever. I'm just saying that like my LC triple quad knowledge doesn't help anything with the Romer kits.
If you're doing
Maybe
by,
it's different people, is that what you're saying?
Yeah.
The Romer kits are, they're
More
reacting
work
to,
groups, longer timelines.
the test is.
Science.
Right, yeah, I understand how it works.
So I don't know, is that a micro group or is that a chemical group?
I would call that more micro than, I don't know.
I mean, that's what I would say too. Is I'd say it's micro.
Whereas it's not an appropriate assay.
Oh, no.
Well, that that is a different question. But
That's the question. That is,
Not an appropriate assay. And conceivably also I could use there are kits for pesticides using antibodies as well. I could also do that, right?
supposedly, yeah.
do you find mycotoxins in cannabis?
Yeah.
Are they over the 10 ppb or are they just straight?
20, but yeah.
Well, 10, but do you find them over level?
It's rare, but also, the European experience with mycotoxins has been that it comes in, it's seasonal, and you may go 10 years with nothing, and then you'll have one season with many.
It's very much weather and regional dependent.
Yeah.
So EU is just terrible. You want, what happens in Washington State? We traditionally had lots of people tell us, oh, Washington, you should have terrible mycotoxins.
But we don't see
In
it.
practice, it's not true.
Well, the ones we're looking for, right?
Well, for we have 7 climates. I mean, we've got everything from rainforest to desert. So we're very large variety of weather conditions. And the west side of the state's very wet. And the worst mycotoxins are like the Midwest with the lakes, where there's a lake, the Wisconsin lakes have terrible time because they can never dry out their grain. You put it on the ground and it's never dry.
I mean,
But
concentrate.
for a lot of
Concentrates.
Spokane, you really
Concentrate.
shouldn't have any issue
Well, I
with
mean, like
mycotoxins
solvent-based
because
concentrates, but
it's
that's,
dry weather. I mean, even when it snows, you put a tarp over it and the ground stays dry.
Yeah.
You can keep
More the wet side.
You can keep
We
dry.
have,
But then we had this season where all the beans aren't dried yet, right? I was hearing on NPR, they're laying out their beans on the concrete to try to dry them out faster.
started to come up with,
But,
lab standard.
but it just, obviously you need real world data, but comparing EU and Washington State.
Well, that's what I'm just saying. The European experience has been that you'll go many years without any detects, and then you'll have one season where it's bad.
I'll feed it
And
to accreditation.
we've had our worst case where people ship it in from elsewhere.
Yeah.
That's what really.
Sort of accreditation, we'll look to, we'll accredit to those, we'll accredit to those.
So, just again, the ground truth right now, there's 2 labs doing metals.
that is correct. There's 2 that are certified for metals.
Is this kind of everything, or what are we missing?
I mean, theoretically, we could talk about foreign matter or moisture.
Water activity.
Well, yeah, when I say moisture, I mean,
Are those on there?
It's low-hanging fruit, like it would be
yeah, I mean,
wham, bam, done. It's pretty easy.
For foreign matter, you could probably just say use the AOAC method such and such, or I don't know why.
look at the,
Okay, let's go
But
on.
if you really wanted to be robust, you'd have to do
Foreign matter in,
gypsum does it right. Whole method.
it's in flour. I think we only do it in,
The strength of
You only
foreign
have a
matter
requirement in flour, but it
is-
probably should be for all samples.
is so
I said it was
dependent
kind
on
of implicit in
sampling.
samples.
Super stressful.
We do it for every sample. I'm not gonna not look at it and take a picture.
Yeah, moisture is water activity and water content.
Loss on drying, don't call it moisture.
So we asked that,
Don't call it moisture?
one of the
I'm just, the pet
So
peeve
one
of
of the
mine,
things
not a moisture
we
measurement.
put forward to the work group was about moisture. If the work group could describe what they mean by moisture. So do they mean loss on drying and under what method, or do they mean Carl Fisher, actual moisture? And if you want moisture activity, which is a micro test,
Right now, what we have the labs doing is loss on drying and water activity.
But moisture is technically,
Not
Carl Fisher,
either of those,
is
yeah.
like actual presence of H2O molecules.
Right.
And that is a loss on drying, and we know cannabis loses other things when you dry it, and you know that different ways of drying it give you different numbers. So the 95 degrees under vacuum gives you different than 103 degrees for 2
Sure
hours,
does.
gives you different than
Oh, yeah.
105 degrees for 5 hours. Those are all very common. Those are like the 3 common ways to do it, and they give you very different numbers.
Depends on your matrix too, if
So-
it's ground or not ground.
Well, yeah, if you don't follow the method, yeah, it all depends. It all
Is this
supposed to be grand.
Same group that
I mean,
did
yeah, it depends
pesticides
on
and plant, gonna be doing pesticides and products?
That would be the most.
Hopefully.
Are they going to do something else?
Mycotoxins.
Mycotoxins and products, this is the same group?
I could see some additional members adding for
So-
mycotoxins,
so
to
the
incorporate the
mycotoxin-
biocide.
Can be done by, LCMS, which would be the same thing, and they can be done by, test kits, which are sort of more microbial.
But that's also true of pesticides.
Yeah, but mycotoxins are very commonly done by test kits. So I think there's gonna be a lot of pressure from people who like test kits to use test kits. Are people using the test kits? Are they using
Yes,
them all?
most of the labs are using the test kits, this is unvalidated in cannabis.
That is correct.
Mhm. And will they wanna keep doing that? Are they gonna have to?
I mean, there's gonna need to be some validation, of course.
Because if you say they have to use an LCMS, that's a lot more expensive than one of those. You basically go buy the test kits pretty cheap.
Yeah, it was like $5 a well.
It seems like there's kind of two ways of doing this. Either we assume we're gonna do everything and just figure out the most efficient pathway to getting there, or we prioritize, you know, what's in the House bill, what's most important, and hope to get the other things done.
So, yeah, that's why I
Also
started
green.
these, because these are
Yeah.
musts.
We could probably do loss on drying too.
It's
But
green.
loss on drying probably goes with the potency group. Whoever uses potency should probably also do loss on drying.
Okay.
And foreign matter is, the most important part of foreign matter is sampling, which is off scope. So we could like give you half a foreign matter test, but not tell you how to sample it. And
Foreign matter wouldn't be its own work group. It would definitely be rolled into something.
Green goes
It's
together.
like really low priority too.
foreign matter is really struggles if you don't, because a lot of foreign matter is just how to sample a sample, so you make sure you get all the foreign matter represented.
Should we get rid of it?
I mean, I'd rather see terpenes than foreign matter.
Terpenes is another one on the list that we
Not
should add.
Isn't that?
I mean, just a
required.
personal one, it's not on the list, but in the other category. 'Cause
Microbes
I've
have
just
to
seen a
be
lot
another
of problems with it.
work group. That's all, that's gonna have to be.
Micro.
Micro. Metal?
That's,
Stone, I mean.
yeah, it's its own group.
Gonna run out of colors.
I'll use
Here's a
blue.
light green.
The light green. I'll use blue.
Draw a star.
The blue is its own, metal is its own.
For sure.
And if you do mycotoxins and products as part of the pesticide group, you may have people that wanted to have been in that group that didn't get included. So it
Okay.
may be like, if you would have put it out as micro, I would want it to be in that group, but you put it out as pesticide,
Is microbe,
as mycotoxin.
Myco.
this one?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, this is now
That
the
could
same
be-
group.
That could be black
Put a
and
little
green.
note beside it, like, need to add something.
They,
Green,
it
green.
would not have been clear to people that they were signing up for mycotoxin test group if you said pesticide and
Yeah.
flower.
I would say green plus black or whatever the micro is.
What
Like you
about
could
the
put a
red
black
and
box
Yeah.
/ green box.
Myco is green and black, is what I'm saying.
This one?
Myco.
This
Yep,
one?
so put a black box and then a slash.
They should be the same?
Green and black. Green and black.
It's either or.
But what does that
Yeah.
mean?
It means
Do
that,
you want to do this test by the micro way, or do you want to do by the chemical way? Because
Yeah.
there's two different ways to do it.
Do you
green,
have a microbiologist that's leading it,
Yeah,
or do you have an organic chemist?
and we should probably have members of both of those communities.
There's two
on
ways to
biochemist.
do it. There's
Or a biochemist?
Okay.
Right.
So
So we're gonna
mine
get two answers to this
mycotoxins are produced by
for the client to
funguses,
consider.
and so they're biology, well, they might agree on one way. I mean, like, you know,
I mean, the whole,
one way.
yes,
so-
the whole point of having performance-based methods, right, is we don't tell you that you have to use an LC and a GC to do pesticides, right? And the same thing would go for mycotoxins. Sure.
Well,
As long as they, demonstrate that performance.
Absolutely, I agree.
Got it.
Well,
So is this really black?
I sure tried.
It's both.
it is
'Cause
both,
You're gonna want chemists
theoretically.
and microbiologists both on that work group
Do
talking
we have
about.
microbiologists? We do.
Not currently.
Like in the
We're
room
talking
or
about
like in
chemistry.
ecology?
Yeah, we've all got microbiologists.
Oh, here.
all right, we've got one.
You do have them on your work groups though. Like Jason Fitzer's a microbiologist.
It would have to
I don't know if
be,
he's
it would have
got
to
He is not on
It
the work
wouldn't be
group.
me, I'm not a microbiologist.
Julie
That'd
is,
be over
but
at, Microlab.
yeah, he was initially, and then
Yeah,
he put Julie
Closer
in.
than Yakima.
So where would residual solvents fall?
You could almost put that in potency. It's not the
This is volatiles
same.
analysis, so
Yeah.
it's different.
But is it the same expertise that could address it?
Similar but different.
Different enough, similar enough?
You think it's different enough?
I think it's different
I think
enough.
it's different enough.
I mean, you're doing a lot of these things on an LC, and then that's definitely on a GC, so.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm gonna have to,
I mean, closest would be green, closest would be the
If you
chemist,
like a-
but,
It's, yeah,
Yeah.
volatiles is like, semi-vols is a different,
Yeah.
I think semi-vols is a fun group. We don't really have a semi-vol chemist group. I mean, pesticides are small molecules, but most of them are not volatiles. Some of them are volatiles, but they're not really like solvents, high vasopressor.
well, yeah, you're not doing a headspace
Well, you
or a
do-
purge and trap.
Well, you have MCP. Some of like phenoxy is pretty, low mol phenoxyesters are very volatile, but for the most part, you're not there.
Yeah, but we're not running that on a purge and trap system or a headspace.
You
or-
can.
Well, you can.
now we have to map this out. So, pesticides in plant is due in July of 2020. Metals and potency is due December 2021. So that takes care of those three with the stars. We gotta fit everything else in.
All right, just start coloring. Well,
So everything that's green, the dark green, would be, ag's gonna be the lead on that, so how long to do the rest of those?
Well, it took us 6 months to do this, right?
But we did a lot of learning, a lot of
And we did a lot of learning.
Okay, so,
Between here and here, we have
so
18
pesticides and products to do not, food, to do
Yeah.
anything before you go to, before you
Everything
start
but food.
added other products, if it's just more refined versions of cannabis, so oil, shatter, vapes, and so forth. That would be pretty quick.
Pretty straightforward.
If you wanna add food, we're gonna have to spend another
don't worry about food.
Don't worry about food?
Don't worry about food.
Okay.
edibles will require some extra time for us to figure out how to,
So
because
I'm gonna add refined.
you'd have to go to EPA, here's get a generic food.
By the time we get to 2021, FDA's already gonna have their recommendations for food.
FDA has food already, so you can sort of take FDA's method and use it, but it breaks all the sort of regulations, because FDA assumes you don't have any cannabis in it at all. But it has all the regs on how much.
But it has THC?
But FDA's required to come up with regs by Q1 of next year
So then we just use
for
FDA.
cannabis infused. Yes.
So we just use their rules.
Okay.
The FDA has rules, it makes much more sense just to write the code down.
Would that include action levels as
I
well?
should probably add.
Yeah, it's all general. They don't have action levels, they'll have tolerance, because it's the federal government. A lot of food is all 10, but you can include sort of the components of your product. So if cannabis has no tolerances, it'll be all contributing from cannabis, you'll get the tolerances of flour, sugar, minerals.
Okay, so when we test edibles, it won't be held to the LCB standard.
But if it's held to FDA standards, it's 10 ppb on everything.
Oh, okay, I see what you're saying, so it's lower than that.
Okay. So pesticides and products, is that gonna be quick?
It should be quick.
Can we get that not by the report, but the work done by
Okay, so we could do it a meeting or two, I think. I think that'd be easy.
We'll just talk about commodities for
A pre-edible should not.
15 hours and then
Well,
call
if
it
you wanna
good.
talk about it, you won't just be trying to split flour into three things.
Oh, it'll be-
all these other.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. It'll take a while.
Oh, yeah.
And I heard this one would be quick, so could this be the same one, foreign matter? Also by July of 2020?
I mean, we could also rank these by priority. That's
I mean,
really
the problem
low
with
priority.
foreign matter is, I don't know whether we should do it at all.
Such
It
low
is so
priority, I'm always
crippled by
thinking about it.
absence of sampling plan, it may not be valuable to do it at all.
Great.
Perfect.
Okay,
I'll lead that word.
okay. Mycotoxin.
We could move on to mycotoxin then and add the microbes.
And, yeah, and keep that same group, but then just add a few more.
Microbes to it.
Okay, how about December, by December of 2020?
How long will it take you to get a new task force, a new work group together?
We're gonna start pretty quick, I think, in soliciting.
Yeah,
We're soliciting from labs, right?
great.
The expertise that we have is the expertise that we have right now.
So we could, I mean, if you wanted to start, say in July with the mycotoxin folks, if you wanted that folks added by then, that would certainly be no problem. I think it takes a couple months to do a fair solicitation where you send it out to folks and give them a few weeks to respond and then look at their stuff.
So maybe have that group, mycotoxin, put in place by, because that's a new group, right? Or we add no new members.
Just adding new members to
Well, how big do we want the group to be before it becomes not functional?
That's a very good point. I always say 14. That's like the breaking point in my mind.
And what would be a win? I'm just trying to stage all these things so that we don't overcommit and underdeliver.
We need
We
to
have
work,
to deliver on this.
we need to work in enough time in the timeline to do the big units. So the metals and the potencies both can take quite a bit of time, I would think.
Yep. Who's gonna lead the metals?
So one thing I was just trying to get clear on is, I think that according to the language in the bill, Department of Ag leads the laboratory quality standards group. I don't know if that gives us any wiggle room for anyone else to lead the group. It says we must establish two work groups, a laboratory quality standards work group to be led by Department of Agriculture. At a minimum, this work group will address appropriate approved testing methods, method validation protocols, and method performance criteria.
We can also create other groups if necessary.
It does say we can, create other groups as, I think
We
there's
don't have
wiggle room.
unlimited
What do you
bodies,
think, Nick?
I don't know.
I think it's
Jen, do you think so?
I think it's me and Juan. Jan.
Jan? Is that your micro half?
Do we want, so there was some value in keeping the existing group together to work on these other things, so we could get there quickly, but we definitely have to make progress on these two.
Which would be different work
Those will
groups.
be two new work groups.
So could we
Two
go
different
parallel with
New ones.
those work groups where, you know, the pesticide group is finishing up their work?
We start, yeah, I think we
No,
start these,
I don't think we'll have a meeting.
Yeah, volunteering you.
so we have the solicit.
We should concentrate on the things we should concentrate on. And then this
Start
task
as soon
force
as
will have to
possible.
deal with motions from all these
Yeah,
groups. So it's already hard enough for us to deal with motions from two work groups.
So you're saying solicit ASAP for the mycotoxin additions?
For metals and potencies.
Oh, for metals and
So,
potencies.
so these are the three that we have to do, the must, and we wanna get them started. These are different work groups, so that doesn't mean this one can't keep going on these other categories. But in terms of next steps, and shortening the timeline, because at the end, at some point, there's gonna be something that has to go into rule. Right? We're still trying to figure out exactly what that looks like, but right now, these lab standards are in 173, 314, 55, something or other, right? So where those rest of those live, if they live in rule or they live in a guidance document or something, we still have to work out those details. But then there has to be rule type process, so we're gonna try to shorten this so we don't start this.
No, we have till 2024.
For ecology to take lab accreditation.
but there's 2 years of writing in there at the end.
So, so again, the more groups we do, the longer the timeline, the more rules, the more everything. So, and we're looking for ways to shorten the rules. So I want us to get back to the legislature with, here are our ideas on shortening the timeline. Right now, so we're just lengthening it. We're shortening it a little bit with moving these things as soon as possible. Just when we need to be done. When we need to be done. I sort of, these are the musts and these are the others. So, we need, like, where's the expertise in metals? In products?
Ecology.
Sarah.
So we have a few options. So Sarah is a metals chemist. She can't start a work group until she gets this report. I think that will be a sinking ship. But I'm wondering if you guys happen to have metals chemists, or if we could wait until this report's complete and then start the metals group. Do you guys have metals chemists?
We do metals and agricultural products. We do metals and seed fertilizer.
So does it matter who leads the group? Do we need to determine what we'd be following, if it would be ag metals methods or EPA metals methods?
Don't we have,
Does that help drive it?
the rule? Don't we say ag has to look at this one?
It does say that. But,
Right.
but Jen, our legislative lead, is over here, and Nick was saying as well that it sounds like in the language that there's flexibility in that. Do you want to speak?
Organize the work groups to create new ones as needed.
Right.
Started off with the two, and then there's some flexibility built in as needed, as it's on.
So ecology is, the expert on metals testing, and if you want a generic method to test for metals on everything, ecology methods seem like the right choice to me.
We could do that. That would be an option, but we need to really be intentional about the timing so that
Yeah, so we don't,
getting-
we don't start it right, it doesn't start until, well, we can solicit for members, but it wouldn't start until, it'll start when the report is done, which sometime in the spring.
when it's submitted to Governor Relations at least.
Another test is there.
Okay, so, that would put,
that's what we were saying, after she submits the report, then there would be,
Okay.
what do you think of that, Sarah?
I know there's other metals chemists out there.
Yeah.
There's only two labs that do metals right now.
That's correct.
So it'd be a very small work group. Not that that's an excuse for not doing it, or, I think we should leverage off of all the other, make sure all the other agencies are in there, to get as much power behind those methods as possible. There are some FDA methods for food, that look at metals. I'm not the expert on those.
This is just the lead, but, so maybe members is another category. So if ag has metal chemists, that could be part of this. And health, well, health is in the room.
You need help in the room for that conversation.
Yeah.
Health has metals chemists, has at least a metals chemist.
And I believe they are the ones that have tested.
Are you
They-
a metal chemist?
Yeah, why not?
Okay.
It was health that said that they have tested metals
Yeah.
in,
Yes, they have an ICP MS somewhere,
and they have
and
tested.
it may or may not be broken, but they do have an ICP MS.
Didn't they say they have tested?
Yeah, so they, in the short term, there was a time when no private lab was doing heavy metals, so DOH was trying to do it for a couple months, I believe.
We have other folks too at the laboratory, so Meredith is a metals chemist, right? So we do have other folks at the laboratory that we could tap into as well, if we wanted to kind of, because Sarah is also attending all the work groups, so
Yeah,
we
yeah.
have three
It
going
may-
on at the same time.
So, we're not saying it has to be Sarah.
Right, right.
Doesn't John have a inorganics half?
There's, yeah, that's Meredith.
Oh, okay.
So, Okay, and then each one of these, I mean, again, there's a budget thing, so we gotta make sure that we stay within our budget. Not saying that we're not gonna do this exercise, we may prioritize it, and, okay, this is where we draw the line. Okay, but this way, who would lead potency?
I mean, we also have the new, Ryan that we're hiring,
That'd be LCD.
the.
About that.
So there's, I was gonna say that proficiency testing chemist that we're hiring is one option.
For potency?
Yeah, I mean, 'cause I think he has the right background. I mean, would you guys say based on, Sarah, would you say looking at his bio and resume and everything?
As much as Nick's gonna love me for this, he's actually tested cannabis products for cannabinoids.
Nope. Not true. Never happened.
Well, do we wanna,
There's
I
some
mean,
options.
Sorry, Nick.
okay,
CDs, yeah.
okay. So this says, we don't need one, same group. So did we say LCB on this one, or UI?
I think we're debating,
Okay, because I'm not sure that we should do two.
right,
Again,
that's a good point. What do you think, what do you guys think, Nick?
Kendra's opinion is my
So actually, if I were gonna lean, LCD got no money to do this, right? Ecology and agriculture are the ones that got the budget to do this, so as far as we're in for all of it. We have to be in for all of it, but I think it becomes a bit of a stretch. I think you're right, we can build additional work groups, but as far as the funding to lead, it gets a little squishier.
We do testing in campus policy.
Yeah, you guys actually do that in your lab, so maybe that would be the best choice.
okay. And then we would, this would be, again, all the usual suspects. Pretty much the members are, everybody, we get our hands on that.
Pretty sure you won't have issues with that, for that work group.
Yeah, so this is, probably irrelevant at this point. Okay, so, micro,
I mean, Department of Health, well, that, we may run into the same thing about the money that Kendra just mentioned. They didn't have, I don't know if they had anything in their,
we only have to do these
then
three.
shaking your head, yes, that they did get money in the fiscal note. So Department of Health, I mean, they do all the microbial testing for drinking water and for, septic stuff, and
So that goes, of course, with a question mark. They need to be in on the conversation.
I'm thinking we can invite them.
All in favor?
Happen, right?
And again, if we, these are the only three that we have to do. Residual solvents.
Reconvene as we move forward, maybe, like put
Yeah,
that as a, we know we're going to tackle these in the next, and then come June, July, we look at our capacity and how far we've come,
We can.
because those are not central required ones.
Yep, just trying to get a little structure to,
So-
responsibility here.
This is one of those items where it's not spelled out in the, in the bill, so to speak, but we're definitely gonna have to discuss residual solvents in concentrates before ecology takes over accreditation, right? I mean, it has to be addressed because it's required testing. So if it
Who
doesn't,
requires it?
LCB,
Okay.
I mean, it's part of the, if you bring a concentrate in, that's part of the required testing. So it seems like we're gonna have to talk about it in some way or another unless it falls under one of these other categories that we're addressing, because it is different.
So what kind of expertise is necessary to do residual solvents?
Volatile.
Who does volatile?
That could be Ryan. I think.
Yeah. Based off his bio.
Okay. That kind of covers them all. Loss and drying.
I mean,
We're gonna deal with the potency work.
that's just going with potency.
Oh, it is. You're right. Okay, good. So now in terms of order, so we said, so this one is essentially essentially very near completion. We have metals, which won't start until the report's done. We have potency, which could start sooner. Right?
We need a group, how long will it take, like 3 months to get a group together?
Well, I think, how long did it take us last time? I think we did it fairly quickly.
Fairly quickly, I think a month.
So we had our first meeting at the end of August, and I don't think we started solicitation until July, so 2 months.
Potency will be the most contentious, or with the most interest to get into, for sure.
So we'll need some criteria.
It would be great too to have support on member selection. I mean, well, I guess we have the agencies together now. At that time we did it, so it's
Yeah.
a little more challenging, but
Yeah, well, it'd be nice to have some criteria
yeah.
for, what, the expertise that we're looking for, so that we can be somewhat objective in how we choose who is on that. Again, 30 people, you're never gonna get anywhere, so.
But everybody wants to have their voice heard on that one.
So we may just have to come up with a way for folks to have a voice, even if they're not on the group. But we do. We have public feedback sessions. We do have mechanisms for people to give us their opinions and their piece. So, I feel like we can manage that.
Maybe we can discuss criteria for the potency work group at the January meeting,
Sure.
and then solicit.
People can start thinking about that. Start putting down a list, and then we can select. That's a good agenda item for January. Thank you. And it is lunchtime, so I think we made some progress here. That's good. Not really sure what to say about our timeline, except that the efficiencies is we want to start with these three sooner rather than later, and that should provide us some efficiencies there. Still need to wrestle down the rulemaking requirement that's going to go with these. So as soon as we're done with these, are they going to go immediately into rule and then we start working? Probably not, because opening and closing is not a minor thing. So does it have to live in rule? That's still something that we're grappling with in terms of the timeline. Okay, I think that's a good time to break for lunch. Anything that I missed? Anything obvious?
Are we gonna work through lunch?
I think we're gonna take a little bit of a break, because, yeah, I think she probably needs some help grabbing lunches, so I'll probably go help her. Why don't we give ourselves a half hour to just eat lunch and take a break, and then we can get into the motions,
And that's all we have left to do,
and that's all we have left to do.
Should be pretty straightforward.
Okay? Anybody, so we'll reconvene at 12:30. Give people a chance to do what they need to do. Right. On our direction here. So, pesticides and plants, pesticides and products will be the same work group, and it'll get started, in January. Give yourself Christmas.
You want us to start in January? 2020?
2020?
2021?
In pesticides and products?
Oh, yeah, I guess we didn't schedule another meeting, so we have to schedule another meeting.
Okay.
We thought we were complete.
Well, for pesticides and plants. Pesticides, now we're going into products, so we'll just say a January start. Mycotoxins, we'll wanna add some members, so there'll be a process to doing that. And, so can this be done concurrently with this?
I would definitely not do them concurrently.
So,
I mean, the green part of this, not the black part of this.
unless the task force wanted to direct how we're gonna do mycotoxins. There's test kits and there's LCMS. So that's gonna be the first thing that's gonna be the big, more contention. And then
This green is LCMS?
it's not gonna be solvable,
Correct.
and it's gonna come back as a motion to the task force.
What?
It's probably gonna be contentious, and it's probably gonna come back to a motion. So if you want to address should we test mycotoxins by LCMS, or should we test them by test kit, or should we test them by both?
Just from an organization perspective, I think it needs to be after the other one's done because we're gonna add new members to it.
Correct.
I would finish up do the pesticide and products first, and then start on the mycotoxins, and at that point we'll add new members.
Okay.
How soon could the mycotoxins start, I guess?
So the black one, so WSCA is gonna lead the green one, who's gonna lead the black one?
They'll be together in the same group.
Whoever does
We'll just
microbial.
add microbial folks to that team is what I was thinking. Is that what everybody else is thinking?
So,
And I was thinking just a couple, like, you add a couple microbiologists just to get the micro perspective on mycotoxins, and then you could kind of transition into the micro group from those couple microbiologists at first.
So
Should still be Mike leading it.
if we go LCMS, then it's probably me, we go for that. If we go test kits, maybe we need a different person.
You could co-lead it with,
You know, I think there's sort of the question underlying that is, how do we want to test for mycotoxins? Maybe you decide that as a task force level first, and then decide who's in the group.
do we have enough expertise to tell us about the pros and cons so we can make an informed decision?
Well, if we're doing performance-based, right, yes, there are different, methods for either of those, right? Specific pieces of equipment, but if it's performance-based, we technically need to write the methods for both because it's up to the lab, and if they can demonstrate the performance against it.
Do you agree with that? That regardless of which platform you're using, the documents that we've already
Test kits generally
reviewed?
are kit-based. So they're this kit is authorized to use on this product. And then the kits would be, the kit maker would then get,
Yeah,
would
so
do the
usually
validation
kit-based,
for
you don't
ALNC.
do a validation in-house, you just do a
No.
verification.
Kits generally would be validated by the kit maker, and it would usually by a third party, they'd hire AOC to validate the kit for something.
it has, the kits already have SOPs and they're kind of a quantity tray
No, they're just a
or
method,
something.
just do this, like,
Okay.
follow the procedure. Usually they're pretty
Yeah,
simple.
you buy it in a box.
And most of the actual hardware is the manufacturing instruction of the antibody. And that's done by the kit maker. So the real QC isn't of the QC of the person, can you measure at 100 microliters? It's of the manufacturing of the kit. The kit is fine. It's usually really simple to do the kit. There's not a lot of error in the kit used. It does the kit work for the matrix or the manufacturer correctly, which is why most of the kit makers, like for grain, would have a third party validate their kits. And then,
Do we have
The issue we
kit makers?
have, yes, we have kit makers who are making kits for grain. They're being applied to cannabis with no one having,
Gypsum does extensive work on kits, and there's huge amounts of mycotoxins on grain. It's extremely common testing. I mean, we have, yeah, I don't know whether I could ask some of the grain people about test kits, but it's not the right matrix. Usually you do another study on, does it work in, cannabis.
So who would create a test kit that would work on cannabis?
Well, who would create it? It would be, it's a monumental process to create these kits. It would have to be a large manufacturer of test kits, a Roma or somebody who can kill enough rabbits to make this happen. No,
but
you have,
literally though.
no, you really have to kill a lot of rabbits.
And goats too,
You have to kill a lot of rabbits to make one of these test kits.
Why?
because they're using their antibodies.
You have to sensitize the animals to the antibodies to make the antibody produce the antibody, and then you harvest it from the
You
animal.
need two antibodies, there's a goat and a rabbit.
And then you make the anti-antibody by injecting the animal with the anti-antibody to make them make the anti-antibody, which you have to kill a lot of animals.
Okay.
Marketable information.
Yeah.
Do we?
Sarah
So-
just mentioned that we have somebody from Romer on our listserv.
You would ask them about it. They might know.
Yeah,
Those are the real experts. Probably the validation people, AOAC and those sort of people who do validation of test kits, and the makers. And that's where the hard work is with test kits. It's not, can you I've had 100 microliters of solvent into a little beaker. That's not the QA part of it. The designing of the resin bed.
Okay,
I mean, that still goes down, as performance-based method, it just still goes down like level 3 or level 4 validation, or validation, right? Where you're saying you have to pass whatever criteria validation for the kit, or you can validate in-house, right?
How do
Because,
you validate test kits?
oh, I'm not saying test kit, I'm saying like the LCMS part of it.
The LCMS, you could do it in-house validation,
Yeah.
and you could standardize it.
Yeah.
If the LCMS, you could buy micro standards and standardize it because it's standard. And you could do calibration curves. I mean, you could sort of, you could do that part of the test kit, make your own test concentration solution, but I don't, again, the hard part of the test kit is making the antibody and the binding.
I'm not disagreeing, I'm saying if you're writing performance criteria, it's going to be around the idea that you have to be level 3 validated or level 4 validated, and here's also what you would have to do if you were doing it in-house.
Most of the test kits would never get validation, they'd all be external. But, I mean, if you want to try to validate it, just internally have them. They work though, and they're cheap. That's the real problem, is that they have them pre-made, you can find mycotoxins in them. Are they exactly perfect for the 20 ppb level on cannabis? Do they not work at all? No, they work. They're valid technology.
okay. But we don't know who would be leading that group. And we'd also need a lead for the micro products.
And that's where we said we would talk with Department of Health to see if they might leave the micro group.
Right.
But I think with, if we're gonna try to leverage off of the pesticide group and move into mycotoxins, I think for that, you could just add a microbiologist from Department of Health or elsewhere.
Okay.
And I was kind of in my mind thinking the work group could hash all this out and figure out, okay, LCMS or the test kits, what are we doing?
So
Contentious, and it will end back here.
Yeah.
okay, so, and the
So it's
people,
better if you just,
and the people
figure
that
out.
didn't get a chance to be on this work group, that are in favor of test kits,
Probably the people who are gonna
are
want
gonna
the
be most
test kits.
contentious about. So the fact that we didn't put it out in the first place is this is gonna look for mycotoxins. Might come back to us in the end, like you were looking for pesticides, so of course all the people with pesticides have LCMS, and these are right pesticides, so they think it's
they're gonna go
fine.
that way.
It was the people that don't have LCMS that are gonna be most like, we have to use the test kit.
We could solicit
In theory,
to
that
add
could
people,
happen, maybe they
or
won't.
do it completely.
I just don't wanna run it back and have it look like we weren't.
Maybe we should try to get a presentation at one of the steering committee meetings on the mycotoxin issue, whether, a presentation on here's what LCMS provides, here's the pros and cons, here's what the test kits provide. We could bring someone in from.
Well, I think the suggestion is email the Romer person, see what they say.
Okay.
See whether we get an expert from the test kit environment.
Get them to come talk to us.
Maybe they can provide more information on sort of the whole, because they're the one that really, ideally what you would have is more validated through a third party, and we just go that stuff. Romer had everything validated.
I mean, from what it sounds like, they're gonna have to do that if they're gonna wanna stay in this market. Right? If you're creating a test kit that's not validated, then obviously we're not gonna be able to use it in testing cannabis.
Except that the cannabis labs are, so they're making money without having to spend any.
So, I mean, if they're not validated currently, then they need to get validated if they wanna keep
And then
people
that could
purchasing
also
their products.
be a push for the test kit manufacturers. There's
Yeah,
more than
that's-
one of them.
yeah.
If you say, if one of you could validate a test kit, we'll say that yours is the only one that can be used in Washington State. Sort of.
Okay, and
But
residual,
I don't know how difficult it is. I really don't know how manufacturing, validating test kits, how much a big of a program that is. So it would be nice to reach out to the actual person. aroma or there's another delicate manufacturer out there.
So, given all that, if we were gonna pursue the LCMS version of mycotoxins, when would that start?
I mean, it's gonna hopefully start post-pesticide and products
Right, I haven't,
or
so,
in concurrence with the ending of.
So I think what we're looking at is, we'll start out doing the next meeting of the pesticide group as being product. And hopefully, by the next time we meet, we can start with a new group for potency. Potency is probably gonna take 3 to 6 months. And then, maybe after we're done with potency, come back to microtoxins. That would give us time to re-solicit a list.
okay.
A head check, is the proficiency test work group still in existence parallel to all of this, or does it disband? It stays in parallel?
Yes. As soon as we get the new person hired, they'll be consistent.
Okay.
Part of the reason I just bring that up is we have other people in the PT work groups, and I'm thinking about just sheer number of people to participate, right? It seems like right now, 2 work groups running parallel has been pretty doable, right? A big enough a stretch, but doable. But the minute we start talking about we're gonna double into a third, I think that's gonna be a stretch on people's schedule.
But if we did, suppose we finish up the work group 1 for potency, and then we switch to, we finish up for the product. Next meeting, I don't think that'll take long, maybe 2 meetings, then we switch to potency. Do potency for 6 months. At that point, maybe Sarah's past her deadline, we can do metals. With the metals chemist pharmacology, maybe we'll more concentrate on it, and we do metals for 3 to 6 months too. And when we're done with that, then we can do the wrap-up stuff, like the mycotoxins and whatever's left.
It sounds like you're saying we could maybe start the potency group in March or April.
Well, suppose next meeting, we get together standards, what do we want, the criteria to be. And then you publish the standards, you have people apply, and the meeting after that, so the February meeting, you agree, here's the people that are going to be on the committee. Which means the first meeting of that committee would be probably March. Because now you're on the committee, now people have to figure out time in their schedule to come to the meeting. So if you stick to what you were saying earlier, criteria in January, and you put the solicitation out, agree to who's on the committee in February, March the committee starts.
So this is soliciting potency?
Soliciting for potency. Or criteria.
That's figuring out the criteria. That's
And then
when
you
the steering
solicit
committee
between
thinks
the
about
meetings.
criteria.
And then you solicit between the meetings, and then in February, you select your candidate. Here's who's on the committee.
Well, capture everything you just said, because I like how you.
February, you say, the committee meets, it's solicited, it has its list of candidates, it's here's who's on the committee. Then they start, probably March, you have the first meeting. And then it's gonna take 3 to 6 months probably to do.
Okay. And then, probably around then, we're going to, well, maybe before then, we start soliciting for heavy metals.
No, you probably wait till the end of it, till you think it's over. So March, April, maybe May, you solicit for, you have criteria for heavy metals, and then June, you solicit for it, and then July, you start
Why
heavy
not run
metals.
metals and potency and
Once the
parallel?
report's in the review process, I mean, I think Sarah's part will be smaller.
Yeah, but sort of, I think this is gonna need basically the same sort of four overlapping people from LCB and ecology and agriculture and so forth, so just in terms of not, I mean, 2 work groups is probably good, if we just run 2 work groups and change who's the member of the analytical work group, we're not gonna overload people's time. So about the time the potency group is wrapping up and is reporting out its final result, and the work group is, then you start the metals group, and then it runs for the same period. And you can speed it up if the potency zooms through it and everybody agrees on the first meeting.
It's ultimately your simplest analytical method.
Yeah, and it might not take 3 months if people are like really engaged and come to a consensus quickly. Or the other way around, nobody agrees on anything and you push it all up to that.
I think it's that consensus part that you're gonna have problems with.
Okay. Pesticides and products, we said would start in January.
You can do that, yeah, while you're soliciting.
Yeah, right, do that while you're soliciting.
You get that done in the next month.
Get that done, by the time you start potency, you're over with that.
I mean, you could do a solicit for both at the same time in the same email. Just say you're starting 2 work groups.
And then Mike was talking about the end of potency, so potency, say, March, so.
Well, no, go all the way to end of heavy metal, but it's just don't run 2 work groups at a time.
Well, potency isn't gonna be done until, say, 6 months after March, so that's September. September would begin, the begin of, mycotoxins.
Well, you have July, August, so July you do, so I think you're soliciting heavy metals too early, I think that's your problem.
I have lots of problems.
I used to make it a word, I'm very sorry.
It's all right.
I apologize for being, I'm a little critical unfortunately, so.
You think I'm too early on heavy
I
metals?
think we need to give the potency group a couple months just to do their stuff before we try and overlap with another group.
And we should try to avoid it dragging on for 6 months.
So maybe,
Because it really is the simplest method.
Potency is?
Yes.
give
Okay.
March, April, maybe May, and we start on the next group, yeah.
Start this in July,
Yeah.
election in June, solicitation in,
I think that gives us time to go back and forth with the task force. I think we'll probably have to do that, where we
April, heavy
we
metals.
can't decide on a bunch of things, and we have to bring them forward, the task force makes decisions, and then we have to react to the task force's decision and try to get the subset of, okay, now that we totally have to do it this way, what are we gonna do? And do heavy metals. Again, heavy metals should be quick. I think heavy metals might be really quick if we can all just agree to use, let's use 30/50 or something, it's like,
The more of these we do, the more quickly we'll probably start to agree.
and do we have,
However, if we change our work group members, I mean, they just have to get used to, coming in and the style and what, so
yeah,
there will be a little bit of delay with the change of work group members.
but hopefully heavy metal should be quick. I think we could, we might not even need to do performance, but just use EPM at such and such.
Okay, well, this is still 2020, so that's nice, so we're way ahead of schedule, which is good.
Because since we're doing totals on heavy metals, all you really need to do is,
Okay, so start with mycotoxins, then say fall, October, September, October, depending on how fast that goes. And what about residual solvents? Where should that go? We'll make this all color coordinated nicely.
do we need to have, the new guy comes first? I think we might need his input. Who is
Ryan.
Yeah, Ryan. If he's gonna lead it, maybe we should wait for him to come.
Well, I think we could give him some idea. He'll be involved in all these
We may be
things.
projecting a little too far in the future, and by then, are we really gonna be
So
there?
if all of this work, right, mycotoxins, let's say, takes 3 months, you're at December 2020 with a planned report that's due, right, so now you're right in the same bucket of having all this work due. The big pieces need to be done, so you can then start drafting the report for,
By July 21.
No, December
December
2020.
2021.
Yes, but
Yeah,
Everybody else needs to finish up by July.
So we have 18 months from
I get more time.
According to
It's your life.
what's in the bill, and we're trying to shorten the
So
timeline.
then, yeah, you do everything else the first 6 months of 2021 if there's something left, if we want to do. I think at that point, we're
It says on micro, or loss and drying.
lots of drying we do with posts.
Yep.
And lots on drying also, we put forth one of the other issues, side issues of the pesticide group is what is moisture, definition of moisture in cannabis. So does the task force as a whole have are we going to define loss on drying as moisture? Are we going to define, what's the answer to that question?
Sorry.
So, in order to do a loss on drying method, the reason why we want this is because they define cannabis as all of these things on a dry weight basis. So what does that mean? Is dry weight loss on drying? Is dry weight Carl Fisher moisture? And then reduction is dry weight. Oh, if it's less than 10% water, it's quote dry weight. What is the
Probably we need the client to answer
the
that
task
question.
force sort of, or we need the task force to,
We make a recommendation and the client either accepts it or alters
Of
it.
course, the rules are open right now, so
or
you could just change the
the
word.
is it now?
task force needs to recommend the legislature define. Task force recommends straight up, legislature needs to write into law what moisture,
Well, that would be in the rule, if we, right?
or somewhere, somebody needs to write it in.
But the most important thing is that it's consistent across everybody.
Which would mean the legislature.
So we don't say what the method is in the rule, but there is already a definition of what must be tested.
But there's no definition of moisture.
Don't say what moisture
That's
is.
the problem.
You used to point to the American Herbal Pharmacopoeia, which defined it as loss on drying.
But we could make a recommendation that moisture be defined as X.
But if we define it as X and the loss and drying test is for Y, we need to define it as X before we ask for what the loss on drying test is. Because we don't want to, here's a great loss on drying test that won't actually test for what we decided.
Haven't we already kind of discarded the idea of Carl Fisher anyways?
I think we should.
I mean,
That would make
I've brought
sense
that
to
up
me.
in the
But
past.
technically, that's what moisture means. So if you
Yeah.
don't have any words and you look it up in the dictionary, it doesn't mean loss on drying. It means do Carl Fisher.
But practically speaking.
A task of the potency group that they make
Yes.
this recommendation.
Yeah.
Maybe
Should we-
try it with them.
Okay.
We could just do, yeah.
So
We
then-
already have it.
So then residual solids will be after mycotoxins. And we'll just leave it within. Sorry, Paul. Maybe that's as far as we can sort of.
That gives us a good 6 to 10 months to do residual solvent and microbial after mycotoxins.
And I would say those are both similar priority level too, pretty comparable. Separate.
Residual solvent and microbial are comparable?
In
In
the,
terms of their urgency,
yeah, that's the right word.
And is that high urgency or low
low,
urgency?
lower the bottom of the list.
Okay, so we may decide we don't do them at all, depending on.
But again, I'll bring up the fact that, ecology is going to have to make decisions on microbial and residual solvents by the time you take over accreditation, because it's gonna be a part of that.
Or the client will have to make that, because
Fair
ecology will only
Yeah,
be
fair
accrediting to what the client,
Yeah.
parameters that the client provides. Okay.
So,
We'll see how far we can get and how that fits in rulemaking and how that adds or subtracts from time. But there's some efficiency, so thank you all very much for your discussion and helping. Are there any other areas of efficiencies or shortening the timeline that we should consider? Okay. I think we've done a pretty good job there already, at least kind of come up with some ideas. So,
Great job.
great. Okay, so next on the list are the motions then. I think next steps are we have our next meetings set up or scheduled, right? Everybody has those dates? Okay, great. Report review. What was that?
Sarah has a couple slides.
Sarah
Yeah.
has some slides. Excellent.
Did we finalize our future dates? Did that get sent out
Alyssa? The future dates, did they get
for
finalized?
the future meeting?
No.
You sent those out?
Yeah,
Okay, I'll just have to
I
look
think
through my
so
email
too.
then, I don't have my calendar.
Okay.
I can
Maybe
send it.
we can
If you
bring
don't
them up.
mind, that'd be perfect.
We can bring them up so that everybody has them. Okay.
That's a good lead-in.
Oh, okay. Okay, do you want to unhide it? Can we get out of presentation?
Escape.
I don't actually think I have the next meeting dates either. Oh.
We'll make sure we, yeah.
I feel like I did go back to the presenter.
Okay. Good.
So here's what we laid out in the first and second meeting, just the 1 year task force timeline. So, yeah.
So we need to start getting.
Okay. I have some, we are here. Yay, there's my visual. I don't know why that was hidden. So I have begun with, the writing, and, like I said here before, I'm waiting for anything else to come out of the analytical group to continue writing. The next step will be, briefing with interested tribes in February, and then, in March, the task force review. And then I have a slide with more details on that next, but then up in April, it'll go to our publications. May, it'll go to our government relations, and June, it'll go to the governor's office, and July, it is due. Okay, so a few more details on the task force review. So I penciled in as many details as I can do now for the review. So between 3.2 and 3.20, I would like everybody to pencil in that that's going to be the main review portion for the task force review.
And you're looking for content there, not editorial, right?
Content, yeah.
Meaning and content.
Right. On 3/16, that's our next meeting. We can discuss any content that we need to at that meeting if there's time allowed, and if the steering committee agrees to that. And then 3:20 through 3:31 is when I would incorporate the edits and reach back out to anyone if there were issues, if there were conflicts in content edits, and try to resolve it to get it into our publications by 4/1. And again, this will be all draft language. Once it goes into our publications, they'll do, plain talking, so some things might move around even, but the content largely should be there.
Yeah, they won't change content.
Yeah, they're,
Just to make it understandable. And then if you go back, so then, yeah, there's a time frame there that, we're short-staffed in our publications group, so, we need to give them enough time to be able to get to this report. Okay, then it goes to our government office, so it can get all the other bells and whistles that it needs. Okay, sorry.
So, and again, here's just a refresh, because I knew we were going to discuss today. The analytical work group starts on the next task, just to show this again, that while I'm writing, and we're going to be doing what we're all discussing over here. And then the last thing here, if it'll move forward, not moving forward. There we go. There's the dates that you were looking for. These are the next meetings. And as you can see, I've, kind of tagged that March 16 one to discuss some of the report findings. Have some discussion in there.
That's all I have.
And this presentation, we can post this, so it's, available, so if you need to look at it, to remember the dates again, it'll be there. And with the timeline and all those good things. Okay? Anything anybody wants to bring up on this reporting timeline? Okay, I feel like we should go back to the motions. Everybody got the dates?
No, I don't.
I'll send these out to you, Gary.
When is no yes gonna be? It's not gonna be on Tuesday? Oh, well, that's, you can't. None of those are Tuesdays, so. Which one? Are those the wrong days? Okay, well, that's all right, we'll figure that out. It's more important to get this
Okay.
right.
So,
Calendars.
back to the motions?
Anything else, Mike? Mike, did you have something?
No, I got a copy.
Okay.
You got it all?
Okay, so let's go back to the motions. So motion one, is motion one both A and B? It just has two parts for readability?
Yes.
But it's all in the same motion?
Yes.
Okay. So, bringing them up, I think.
That one? Yeah, sorry, it keeps kicking us out of the WebEx. Okay.
Okay. So, this is can you make it smaller? There's a 1B part to that.
Oh, yeah, sorry. Oh. Yeah, I was just in the wrong application.
Okay. And, we had discussed adding a, low THC/CBD miscellaneous category. Right?
No, that would be folded into the third category. Because if you mix 10% and 10%, then you will get 5%.
No, that's also not true.
The third category is high in both.
Third category is high.
There is no category that's low in both.
So typically the nomenclature that the industry uses is type 1, type 2, and type 3. Type 1 is high THC, low CBD. Type 2 is blend of both. Type 3 is the opposite.
Neither?
High
What did you
CBD.
say type 3 is, Nick?
Type 3 is high CBD, low THC. Type 2 is known as 1-to-1.
This is saying high THC, high CBD, cannabis flower, would be 10%.
Finding that in nature,
No, and it says you can make it by blending together.
what's the point?
You'd have to find 220s to blend together, 10.
But if 10 and 10 doesn't exist in nature, then
That would only be the case for the last category, right?
Because people don't blend things together in nature. There's no people that.
but we're testing flower. Flower isn't necessarily a whole. Their rules say.
So I'm not totally clear. What is your recommendation? Is it, because when I read the ones that are up there, high THC, I would assume that could be high THC and low CBD, which is what you were saying, right? Or not?
Can you go over type 1, type 2, and type 3 more slowly?
Yeah.
So this is industry nomenclature. This is what the industry talks about with products. Now they're not necessarily interested in the analytics. They're interested in what type of product am I buying.
About selling it.
Type 1 is high THC, low CBD. Type 2 is what they call 1-to-1.
can be a number of things, but it's.
It could be 7% THC and 6% CBD, that's pretty typical.
Roughly
And then
similar.
type 3 is high CBD, low THC. The industry does not tie percentages to these.
And the defect with the motion, the improvements that would be helpful for the motion would be to define, something that has neither high THC nor high CBD as being included in one of these products, so that if you get such a product, you know what you need to run with. So to say, if you choose a product that has neither, less than 10% both CBD and THC, that you could then run it with any of these, or just, pick one and call that THC and run for that product.
So is that just a note on the bottom? Sorry.
I was just gonna ask if you were suggesting to add another bullet below the high THC, high CBD.
No, I don't want another commodity. If you add another commodity, you have to validate against it, you have to do the validation work.
Exactly.
So add some details about
I
what
think
you do when you
if-
have less than 10%.
I think you just say, if you have a commodity that has less than 10% both, you can use the high THC cannabis flower as the market.
So maybe a footnote on that.
By defining where you define in the next section what is high, which is more than 10%. And I feel like it's pretty rare to find flower that's higher than
Over
10%
10% in
on
both?
both of those. And I know you can mix these lots together, but that's not really,
You can't mix flower lots
Yeah, not
together.
when-
Not until
not
you
for
ground it
compliance
to 3
testing.
millimeters, and it's
So-
not flower, it's mixed.
so I think having a third category that's not what's listed here, but that's sort of everything else, right? And then that doesn't, I don't really love the way these are broken down with a specific 10% or more as a high. Anytime you introduce a number like that, then there's people
Arbitrary.
trying to chase that number. They need it to be higher than that, they need it to be less than that, they need, whatever. So if there's another category, then when we have these high CBG strains or whatever specialty flower people are growing 10 years from now, then it all falls into that other third category.
Well, no, the client comes in and says there's a new commodity, and they say high CBG is the new commodity. That's kind of the beauty of the USDA method, is when there is a new apple or a new commodity, they come in and say this is the new commodity. So when THCV becomes big, or when CBG becomes big, client comes in and goes, well, now this is enough of the market that we think this should be validated separately.
So that's a pretty easy rabbit hole, though, to get down into 40 different sub-commodities. Every terpene could be an interference, every cannabinoid could be interference. And I agree with what you're saying, but the practicality side of things could be prohibitive.
Can I propose that we call this one commodity group with one commodity and leave it to the future client to justify adding further commodities? Right now, we just don't have justification. There's there's anecdote coming from the analytical work group, but we don't really have any solid justification for doing this.
What would that look like?
So your argument is cannabis is a very easy matrix, and there's never interferences.
No.
Okay. So it's difficult.
I think the term that was used was highly variable.
Okay, so it's highly variable. But with all this variance, you want to validate one thing, not multiple things.
I'm willing to do multiple things. I'd like to see a justification for it.
The justification is we don't know. How are we going to get the data unless we test it?
Happy to have many commodities, but let's have them based in reality and not just arbitrarily defined.
Okay.
And to tag onto that, from the data that I'm seeing and from what is being presented today, we're doing ourselves a disservice to call THC, CBD our only interferences, right? And those are anecdotal, as Nick's saying. Well, so are all these other ones. And if we're going down this path of sub-commodities, then the number of commodities that we're going to need to have to actually really do this testing is pretty high.
Was the work group trying to strike a balance between accounting for some of the variance and the interferences, but not having to validate an unreasonable number of things.
Yeah.
Is that kind of where we are?
Absolutely.
So I guess my question would be, are these the key interferences that strike that balance, or are there other ones, like you mentioned, the
That,
CBD?
besides the mix, I would say the work group pretty well accepted at least 2 commodities as the mix of trying to get some interferences, trying to validate for some interferences, but not just go down the path of one validation.
And how long did you guys spend discussing this? I'm just wondering, is this like an all-day meeting, or?
It came up in 2 different meetings at least. Your memory is as good as mine, I'm sure.
I mean, it was a big discussion in terms of, but the other part of that was, does it really require validation or just sanity checks throughout the validation to verify? And that's where there was a lot of the debate. There wasn't a debate about, do we need to do testing on these 3 different types? It's just, do we need to call them an official commodity and treat it as all the rules around separate commodities?
That's how you mandate the validation be done. So some of that is the same thing, as if you're gonna call it a sanity check, you call it method validation.
The difference being that there's an ongoing QC requirement.
There's an ongoing, right. So if you're gonna do an ongoing sanity check or an ongoing method validation check.
But in a method validation, I think part of the validation requirements were to test for interferences using different laws, I mean, whatever, right? Different types, I mean, you're not doing, once you get your LODs, LOQs, and your ranges, you're looking at LOQs and 10 different samples, things like that, to detect where these might be a problem.
There were initially some proposals, 3, some for 2, and then just, like you were saying, just do 1 cannabis, and then talked about it in a meeting. There was this sort of same discussion at last task force meeting. We went back to the group and we talked about it again. The consensus from the group was the 3, but there were people that were saying, well, maybe it would be better if we just did the first 2 and not the 3rd one, but I'm going to go on the 3rd one. Everybody else. There was a variety of discussions around these topics. A couple of the meetings. We spent several hours on it.
I'm going to need some clarification from the chemists, because I've heard 2 things, I think, that I'm having a hard time reconciling. So I've heard that these categories, high THC and CBD in combination, cause problems for the analytical process.
Some labs say that.
Some labs. And then I've
Some
heard,
labs say it's
but then I've heard that this doesn't happen. You don't see 10%.
Don't see 10% of both, right? So the blend there is a commodity that doesn't really exist.
But you see 10% in the other categories.
One or the other, yeah.
But what I was hearing Mike say was that 3rd category maybe have that label, but it actually is a miscellaneous category that
No.
everything else can fall into,
I think
no?
we needed, there's a defect in this language that doesn't put stuff that doesn't have 10% in any category. So if you show up at the lab with 5% THC and nothing else, it's not in high THC, it's not in high CBD, it's not in high hybrid, it's not cannabis. But that's a defect in the language. So the language needs to account for that and add in what we should have, we didn't catch it when we were reviewing the language.
So I heard one other thing is, so the 10% is totally arbitrary.
Yeah.
And you were saying for those ones where it doesn't fit into these categories, that you do the validation steps for the high THC?
Just pick, yeah, that'd be fine, just pick one.
So you can use any of them?
Or your choices are either to pick one or use any of them. There's a slight difference. You'll get an ongoing recovery for it. So if you say it's always going to be in the high THC, you'd have the 5% in.
So are we looking at a situation where an individual lab says, we really excel at anything below 8%, and anything above that, we kind of have to double down on our procedures? Is that kind of...
There's some labs that think that there's a giant peak of THC that comes out, and if they adjust their LC run to make the compound plant come out underneath that peak if they get better results.
But this threshold could be different from any given lab, given their
The idea
methodology,
was
skill
that by the
set,
time you get to
experience.
10%, it's high and the peak is giant. That, you know, this, that whether it's 10 or 15, you've already got this way off scale peak of THC.
But you can make the reverse argument too, that 5% is also high. I mean, compared to 100 parts per billion, 5% is enormously high.
Yeah, but that's right. And you just pick 10%.
So that 10%,
That was not-
I thought Sarah was saying that came from data, that the 10% number,
Nope.
oh, that was totally arbitrary?
It was just totally arbitrary on where the labs fell.
Some
Was
labs
it the AHP has those three categories, but no percentages?
That's correct.
Well, the problem that labs had with just saying high THC is it can mean nothing. What does high THC mean to you? Well, I think anything over 100 parts per billion is high, or I think it's 15%, so I'm gonna only test. And then, if it's not defined and it's an arbitrary category and you're audited against it, what happens if well, we've looked at CBD and here's out of 100 samples, you know, the top 2 percentile is this much THC, that's what you have to run it, because high obviously means, you know, the top 5%. You know, so there was just a desire to define it, and it was thought that you could obtain 10% THC and 10% CBD blank, and that would work out for you. So it was like, it's high enough to cause the interference, and it's not so high that we're going to have difficulty obtaining the blank product.
Well, as far as a motion that I think, admittedly, I'm not gonna, in this statement, try and tackle the commodity groups, that I'd like to tackle one maybe separately. Put a motion on the table that the client will replace the EPA as the entity responsible for defining commodity groups and commodities. I'm not talking about additional, I'm saying that the client will be the entity responsible for defining commodity groups and commodities. The motion that I would put on the table now in light of this conversation.
That's the 1B, the motion 1B.
Yes, but I'm making one amendment to it that says, where it says defining additional, I'm taking out the word additional.
Are you thinking that we punt the commodity group thing to the client?
There
I
will
don't want
be,
to say punt, but we just get rid of additional and we only pass this motion for now, and then
there
the
will be
client
commodity
defines it.
groups, and there will be commodities, and the client will replace the EPA's entity who defines that.
So basically taking the whole 1A off the table and leaving that for the client to deal with.
The methodology does not
Yeah.
work if you don't have cannabis flower, the commodity at minimum.
Sure. So I will say that I think that's reasonable, but I don't know necessarily how to get to a motion for 1A right now, and I feel like I can vote on 1B.
I think the structure of the work doesn't
And I
work without,
It
at
needs to be.
minimum, cannabis flower has to be a commodity group, and cannabis has to be a commodity.
Yeah, and
So
is
we
there
could-
any uncomfortability
Could do
with,
that.
with calling cannabis as a whole a commodity? Because it seemed more like those
No, you have to have,
sub-commodities that was
you have to have a commodity group and commodity, so you have to
Yeah.
define both categories. You have to say and I don't think there's any argument about cannabis flower. 1A you can split into two motions.
Yeah,
Cannabis flower should be a commodity group. I don't think
yeah,
anybody's
and I think we
discussed
could
that.
make that motion.
And then you could say,
Individual.
the individual can say, and you could say cannabis flower at least has to be a commodity. Whether it's a commodity or 2 commodities or 3 commodities or 60 commodities.
Yeah, that's what I was
At
getting
least has
at.
to be one.
Is we could give that
Because if it's not
overall.
one, it doesn't work at all. The system, it's so big of a hole in the validation procedure that you have no rules on how to validate cannabis. Like we didn't do it.
Somebody will make a motion and then you'll just type out.
So Sarah just made a little edit over here on her computer that might get to what you guys are saying, which just says that for 1A, changing it to, this motion would initially designate cannabis flower as the commodity group and the individual commodity is cannabis flower. And then we could take 1B as it is now, saying that the client will define additional commodity group. And that's where we'd be punting that part over to the client.
The client will define commodity groups if we do,
We're already defining one group today.
If they wanted to.
right, but they might want to redefine redefine cannabis flower back to this way or not. So you want to say, if you say just, if all they're doing is defining additional groups, they're not doing this. So if you could, like, Kendall's language and say, well, they can throw it all out, start over. Yeah. Then what we would give them, we'd give them something to start with, that's a running truck. So I really like the idea of handing over to the client
As a group.
something that will run
Yeah, so that's-
as is, without, oh,
And
it's broken,
the
it's like,
cannabis flower
fix
as
it.
an
It's
individual
like,
commodity.
we missed a step and we should have provided that to the client. But you could say, okay, it's a commodity group, cannabis is a commodity, and then you can redefine it if you want, if you think we were wrong and we should have done this IT
Period after that.
Sounds like a reasonable.
And then if they come out with, the other concerns is we don't know what the future holds, and we don't know what the testing holds. Some of this also, you know, if they get the data back saying, yeah, everybody with high THC got this issue, then they have that in their pocket. Or if you add 20% of pesticide, and that causes, you know, it's fine as it is now, but if we change the pesticide test, weed, that may change what you need to do in the body. So the interference, THC may interfere with some pesticide we haven't even tested yet.
Tara?
Yep.
Sarah's gonna email you the,
Did this get it?
or we can try to
But-
edit it here.
If all you did is validate individual cannabis flower, it is not as robust as what we're talking about.
And I think a lot of us agree that that's the case, that we need to do more than just the base general method validation.
And this would not require that.
Yeah.
USDA is a fairly robust method validation. You would still have to do it for the cannabis, so it's not nothing. But you know, if you don't do 3 commodities, it's less.
And so with this, we would be relying on LCD at some point to.
Or your internal
Or,
structure
I
for your
guess,
clients.
the client,
And
sorry.
your,
Getting ahead of myself.
and, yeah. And also maybe if in practice, it's a big difference. So if you're getting 60% recovery with high THC and 80% recoveries if it's not there, it's gonna show up in your control chart. It's gonna show up in your ongoing QCs, and you may have trend violations and QC violations because in practice it needs to be put out because they're really not.
So, and that's what I was kind of getting at
So
earlier.
it could
Are there
drag you out.
other ways that we can tackle that
Because you're gonna do ongoing QC with cannabis flower of all types.
Right.
So all your QC recoveries for high and low, hybrid, and whatever else you run are all gonna be merged together. If they're really, we'll run this for a month, and then we'll run this for a month, and then you're gonna get a trend warning out of spec range because it jumps 20% because it's actually different reasons.
And I'll put out too that the proficiency work group might consider the state providing a blank matrix, because in doing that, the state could have a pretty good window into what the commodity groups might actually need to be in the future. Have a means of discovering that.
And that may limit you too. If all the blank matrix you can get is from one source, and you're just running, we proved that we can test one cannabis over and over again, well, that might not be robust enough for a real world test where you're getting it from multiple clients.
So are these, did we get these right on the board there? And, so would someone like to make a motion?
Kendra, in the second one there, after the word defining, does it make sense to add or restructuring? I guess defining probably includes restructuring.
I think defining is fine.
It really would
Be, someone would move to designate the cannabis flower as the commodity group and the cannabis flower as the individual commodity. And the second is, move that the client will replace the EPA as the entity responsible for defining commodity groups and commodities.
We'll make sure we capture the discussion, right? So was that a motion?
Yes, I would move to do what I just said.
Is there a second?
I'll second. Sorry, go ahead.
Is there any additional discussion? Oh, hang on, that's my fault. Control Z. Okay, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed say nay. Motion carries.
Okay. That's one. Motion two, additional laboratory roles. So, let's see if we can wrestle this one to the ground. Maybe make them smaller so they'll.
And the author made some revisions, to this one, I think that's what you see on the screen right now, so, I think it might be useful for Sarah to talk about, what her thoughts were on that.
So is the or either the top or the bottom?
Yeah,
Okay.
so the original, motion didn't have quite as much information in it, it just kind of deferred over to the admin SOP. Says that, like, describe it as it's described in the admin SOP. And upon looking through the admin SOP, there was a couple of, additional concepts that were brought in to those definitions that we didn't cover. And if we just punted over to section 6.7 of the admin SOP, all of a sudden there were a couple new, roles of, people and concepts that just kind of went nowhere and would need to be either struck from that. So there's the first part is the TPM as described, in the admin SOP 6.7.
That's 2A.
That's the top.
The very top.
Yeah.
Okay.
And then that also groups in the admin doing the same thing. Is it's the TPN and the admin, as in the respective sections.
So what was the difference?
So if I pull open the SOPs, it starts talking. So, in 6.7 for the TPN, in 6.71, it brings in the MPD director, which we have not defined. And then 6.76, it talks again about USDA, AMS. It just has some references. Extraneous things, that we'd either need to reconcile.
So that would be replaced by compliance.
So we would have to write that in then. We just have to say wherever references are, but that would require a little bit of, review. And the same thing with 6.5, is there was a couple, references that kind of did circular things.
So Sarah, the second
The
choice,
second,
or that pulls all that nebulous stuff
that
out?
kind of pulls it out and then leaves it open for the client to define other roles, other tasks. And I put it in very, I brought in the major portions of it, the subsections. And then they said these duties may be, or let's see, can you make that bigger?
Do you want the section 6.7 and 6.5 reflected though in 2A and 2B?
So,
So we know what we're referencing?
so that's the challenge. If you go back there, there's some extraneous material
Right.
in there. So it's either saying admin section and then editing out the extraneous material,
Yeah.
or just writing in what the actual essential role does,
Okay.
which is the TPN has the overall responsibility, and this is actually verbatim out of there. Responsibility of the technical conduct of the PDP testing contracted to the laboratory, as well as the interpretation, analysis, documentation, and reporting of results, and others required by, this is the language I put, required by the adopted PDP model, SOPs, or client. That's the catch-all. And then these duties may be added to existing qualifying positions already established within the certified laboratory upon approval from the client. That's where that grabs in the, like if you already have a role that does this, the intent of this is that there's a lot of places in the SOPs that say go to your TPM and get approval or go have them review, and you just have to have somebody in your lab that's got that title. And then the client could then define whether that could be your lab director or your, you already have that role in there.
So it seems like the second option is a lot more streamlined. Right, it prevents us from having to reference yet another document that may create further confusion.
Is it complete enough?
I tried to pull out the main elements, that's why I added in the as required by the adopted PDP model.
Okay.
Is when the PDP SOPs say in some random section to go and get approval from your TPM, you know, if that doesn't fit into reporting results, documentation, analysis, and, you know, like, well, it tells you to do it, so this motion would say, your SOP told you to go do this, so, you know, go to that person and they will do this. They will finish this task for you.
I like 2. Should we make a motion?
2 or
2A and 2B? Well, 2A and 2B go together.
Yeah, 2A, so it's either the first one all just combined, or 2A and 2B.
Both of the other 2, yeah.
Is there any concerns, anyone?
I mean, these are, I don't have 2B up there to reference, but these are all things that are happening in the lab anyways, or really should be. You know, making it so that we don't have to have a separate position, that we can kind of divvy it up a little bit. I have no opposition to that. It doesn't really add more work, more cost, but it adds rigor, so win-win in my book.
So would the motion be that we move to adopt 2A and 2B as written on the screen?
That would make it easier.
Yeah.
Seconded.
Okay.
So just erase this time, or,
Yeah.
erase that.
Okay, so, any further discussion? A motion has been made and seconded. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed say nay. Motion carries. All right.
This is the last one, huh?
We got 2 more actually.
No, we're skipping the 4th one.
You're skipping the 4th one. You're absolutely right. We got 1 more.
Are we skipping it? Is that because we already did that earlier?
The motion
We
actually,
talked about it at length, but they're gonna have to email, there's gonna be
Okay,
some
I
back
got
and
it. I
forth.
was like,
coming.
oh,
Yeah.
okay.
Yeah, we sort of came up with it. Well, we'll talk about the processes again so that we're all clear before
Oh,
we.
no, it's good. I was like, oh, no, you're right.
Yeah. Okay. So, motion 3 is the QA officer role.
So again, this motion is not to revisit the vote we've already done, that we said, yes, QA officer. At our last meeting, we said, yes, QA officer must be separate and apart in your org chart with all these. This is just helping to define the roles of that and staff. Yes.
Yes. And the or here is the same as in the last one.
Yes.
Right, so if we did 2 in the last one, we should probably do 2 here.
Just look at it, make sure.
Does this fall into the same category of if you reference that section when there's a bunch of extraneous stuff, so it's better to more clearly define it as in the second?
yeah, and I took out basically the headers of the subsections, of the admin SOP, so it's like section 6.81 is, actually talks about the independence of the QA, but then 6.2 is, data review and transmission, 6.3 is internal audit, 6.4 is sufficiency testing, and it goes on, and so those are just the subheadings.
Did you include all of that though, or did you cut them out entirely?
So,
She included the words, just not the numbered section.
not the numbered section, and,
So whatever, there's no section about the internal.
so that's already what we
We already
adopted, with the,
motioned that.
Actually, you didn't. Wasn't actually.
but it's a role, unique role.
Yeah, we voted on that last time. Yeah.
That motion was already approved.
Yeah, we
yeah.
Did we, can we bring it up, the motion from last meeting? make sure, because that was the key one.
I think that they're only.
But it was definitely there, and then we referenced officially admin as well.
Yeah. There we go. Motion for adopted.
Okay.
Certified labs are required to use a QA officer who should be a separate position and would not conduct testing on client or PT samples.
And that was a motion,
That was from last time, yeah.
and we approved that?
Yep.
Okay. So that in conjunction with this should,
Do I need to bring it up?
no, you're okay. We already did the motion.
All right, I think it's supposed to come up, but.
Okay.
And so your little list, of words there, the roles, at a minimum, those are the separate sections
Those are
that
the
you just sort of
sections,
like
yeah, that I just
taking,
pulled out.
picking apart.
And then the future-proof it is any others required by the PDP model. So at any time, I brought in the reference to the QAU, which we did not adopt because they start talking about QAU, QA unit. So I wanted to bring that reference in too, because a lot of the places are like, go to your QAU and do this rather than a QA. So and that person, is the QA unit can be one person or a whole unit. So I brought in that reference.
It allows you to scale up in a larger
Yeah.
laboratory. You can say, we have a QA officer, but we have so much work that we need more people for the job, so we're gonna have a QA unit.
And again, the intent is just to draw the connection between, there's gonna be a lot of references to a QAU inside these PDP, SOPs, and you need to know what that person is and who that is, and, in fact, that is probably your QA officer. For most of your labs, probably won't have full-scale units, and that's what they will do, and any other references to them or a role that they do that's already in those adopted SOPs is caused by that last little language.
That's the defect, is that without defining these roles, it says in the other SOPs, this person does this, QA officer does this, TPM does this, admin does this, but if we don't say who that person is, that's all this is catching around and saying, okay, here's what, when they define in admin, the QA officer, and then he uses the other three SOPs, we need to repeat that definition somewhere.
Okay.
I move to, vote on the second paragraph here.
Move to, okay. Is there a second to that?
As written.
As written.
Second.
Okay, any further discussion? You have to take out the first paragraph and the or. Is there any further discussion? Okay, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed say nay. Okay, motion carries. And with that, I think we are at the end of our meeting, and we'll open our, up to public feedback. So, let me just check to see if there's anybody on the webinar who has indicated a desire to provide feedback?
Oh, sorry, let me go back. I will say for, the note that came up earlier before lunch, by, Steve, officer from the Department of Health, said that, both Steve himself and Caroline West at the Department of Health have, metals experience. So, I just want to add that into the record.
Oh, heavy metal. Might not be why.
Sounds like they volunteered.
Well, or they could be part of the work group for sure, so we'll just add their, that.
Sorry, Steve.
As a potential.
So you're a metal.
Well,
So you're all ready to go.
way to step up, Steve. Okay, are there any, members that would like to speak?
I just would like to, throw something out, and, a lot of it came out today, so I'm pretty pleased, but, as we sit here sort of December 2019, the reality of it is that we don't have a lot of scientific information about cannabis. We don't have peer-reviewed data. We don't have applied science. We don't have basic research. We have a lot of proprietary data, but that's it. And so everything we're doing here, and everything you guys are doing, is really a bit of a shot in the dark, right? Because we really don't know. And so you kind of have to move forward with what you have. And like choosing the PDP, maybe it's a good idea, maybe it's a bad idea. I don't know. Cannabis certainly isn't just any other commodity, right? I don't know of any other commodities that are grown in abandoned schools in the peninsula and sagebrush land and the east side and 365 days a year. You know, so I guess my suggestion is just to keep that in mind, that we really don't know and a lot of this stuff, and we have to make decisions now, but 5 years from now, somebody might actually do some research, we might have some real data, and it would be really helpful to have documentation. How did we get here? Why was the PDP chosen? Here's the pros and cons. Here's how we think cannabis fits into this PDP. It looks a little bit like lettuce and a little bit like oranges. Whatever it takes, put that together. And also identify the data gaps that we have. This could be a seminal document for future research. If a scientific group says, hey, you know what, here's what's missing, bam, 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 bam. And finally the dam breaks and people can actually do research. And people can point to this and say, hey, look, you know, this scientific committee got together and they say, we really needed this. Right? It's good for funding, right? And, you know, and the state agencies are most likely to be the first ones to get a crack at that, right? Until the feds do. So that's my only comment, my suggestion is that I hope that there's a real thorough documentation of how we got here and what's missing.
It's a great comment.
What's your name?
Jay?
I don't know. I'm Jay Burns. I'm on the PC work group.
Anyone else? Cannabis? Okay. Then I would like to thank everybody, the work groups, who have done an inordinate amount of work on a really tough topic with no easy answers, and getting us as far as we are. I knew this process wasn't going to be perfect, but it's been a good journey with all of you so far, and I look forward to the next journey in 2020. So we have our dates for the next meeting. We will work on this fourth motion, hopefully in short order. Try to get something. We'll try to get a conference call, or actually we thought we would turn it into a webinar, so that we could. So it'd be easy for the public to participate, because it's hard, you know, I don't know how easy it is to get a public phone line. So we thought webinar might be the easier way to go, where we could then try to wrestle that last one to the ground. So we'll look to people's calendars, first couple weeks of January, see what we can come up with. Maybe one more week, just because things are just getting started again, and see what we can do. But prior to our next meeting, which is January 30th. So I want to wish everybody a happy holiday. Enjoy your family and your friends, and everybody else, and have a good time. And this meeting is adjourned.